sunshine overnight, some high cloud drifting in by the end of the night, turning things milder in the south, but a rather fresh start to the day in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Light winds at first as well, but Storm Agnes is moving in quickly by this stage, bringing damaging winds to much of Ireland before spreading those very disruptive winds into Irish Sea coastal areas by the afternoon. So after the early sunshine, it turns increasingly windy through the morning, those winds then peaking in the afternoon and evening. The risk in northern and western parts of the UK of 50 to 60 mile/hour wind gusts, and around exposed Irish Sea coasts of 75 mile/hour wind gusts. So dangerous coastal conditions, disruption to transport and some heavy rain as well could cause impacts for central and southern Scotland. Much of that clears through during Thursday, but it stays windy in the north with the further risk of coastal gales, bright skies further south and lighter winds. Some showers still going on Friday. A fine start to the weekend though, with high pressure building for a time.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick, Christys, it's GB News, and we are taking it up a gear this hour. Suella Braverman is set to stand up in Washington on the world stage and potentially tell the world what it needs to hear about illegal immigration, about refugees and about asylum seekers. There's a few different bits and bobs that she's expected to say. She is expected, of course, to go on about the definition of refugees. We need to change that definition. Why, you may ask? Well, because 780 million people apparently could be on their way to Britain and Europe. Many of them, of course, will end up being channel migrants. And what she is also saying is that channel migrants will not be in and are not in urgent need of asylum. This is the direct clash between our illegal migration bill and what the Convention of Refugees has to say. She'll also be talking again more about this number, 780 million people on their way. And what she's trying to do is make the world community, the global community, wake up now and change that definition of a refugee. She's saying it's too easy, especially for people who claim to be a member of the LGBT community or indeed a woman. They should not, in her views, have an automatic right to asylum. This is going to be barnstorming. She's going to be standing on the world stage in Washington, teeing off on illegal migration, asylum seekers and refugees at 3:30. We have all the build-up, all the controversy and all the reaction with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Yeah, don't take your eyes off it, because like I said, we've got all that controversy, all the reaction and all the build-up coming your way. GBviews at gbnews.com. Do you feel, from what we already know about what Suella Braverman is likely to say, those things that I've outlined there, that actually we do have a British Home Secretary who wants to be world-leading on the world stage now, but this time when it comes to common sense? GBviews at gbnews.com. But right now, it's your headlines.
It's 3:02. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Mayor of Greater Manchester says he could take legal action against the Tory government if the northern leg of HS2 is scrapped. The Prime Minister is reportedly alarmed by the runaway cost of the high-speed rail link, which is thought to exceed £100 billion. The government has refused to rule out curtailing the project. Well, Annie Burnham says Labour will build HS2 if it wins the election, because a failure to do so would have massive implications for the north.
For 15 years or more, many people in the Greater Manchester system have been working hard at the government's request to bring through these plans. We've devoted hours and hours and hours of time. All of our development plans are linked to it. If they pull the plug, they are ripping the heart out of the economic development plan for Greater Manchester and parts of the north. So all options would absolutely be on the table.
Well, as you may have just heard, Sir Ed Davey's been outlining his party's key pledges in a keynote speech in Bournemouth. The Lib Dem leader says the by-election successes in Tory heartlands recently have been historic. He believes people are desperate for change from the Tories. Now, fearing discrimination for being gay or a woman should not be enough to qualify for asylum. That's the view of the Home Secretary, who will question whether the UN Refugee Convention is fit for purpose. She'll tell counterparts in Washington it should be reformed and replaced with something fit for our modern age. The treaty, drawn up in 1951, protects asylum seekers from being returned to a home country if they're likely to face threats to life or freedom. It's all part of her plan to tackle the refugee crisis, but the Shadow Cabinet Minister Annalise Dodds says the Conservatives are to blame for the influx of small boats.
International conventions are not the reason why the Conservative government is failing, in particular, to take action against the international people smuggling gangs. They're not the reason why the Conservative government has such chaos in the asylum system. They're not the reason why British taxpayers are paying £8 million a day on accommodation. I'm afraid the responsibility for all of this lies squarely with the Conservative government.
Meanwhile, Red Cross officials on the Italian island of Lampedusa are rushing to free up space in their processing centre. It's in expectation of another surge in migrant arrivals. GB News can reveal the camp now has just over 150 residents. A week ago, it was dealing with more than 11,000. Scotland Yard will face difficult decisions over how to protect people in London because of a shortage of counter-terrorism police. Sir Mark Rowley says there's significantly less cover available after dozens of officers stood down from firearms duty. It was in response to a colleague being charged with the murder of Chris Cabba. Downing Street insists Londoners are safe, but the Met Commissioner admits his forces are stretched.
Over the weekend, it's had a very significant effect on our capability. We're now in a position where the numbers are strengthening. We can provide credible firearms cover for London, but I must be honest, it's still significantly less than normal, which will create some difficult choices.
A hospital trust failed to send out 24,000 letters from senior doctors to patients and their GPs because they became lost in a new computer system. Newcastle Hospitals has apologised for any anxiety or inconvenience caused, but as a result, the healthcare regulator sought urgent assurances over patient safety. Now, most of the letters were to explain what should happen when patients are discharged from hospital, although some crucial test results may have been missed by patients. The Trust says unsent letters accounted for less than 0.3% of all patient contact. Water companies will have to return £114 million to customers after falling short of set standards. The regulator Ofwat says most companies have failed to meet the key targets of reducing pollution, leakage and supply interruptions. Customer satisfaction is also down. Thames Water will be hit the hardest, having to return £101 million. Southern Water will have to pay back £43 million. Workers in the UK are taking more sick days now than at any time in the last decade. New research from the Chartered Institute for Professional Development shows that staff took on average 7.8 sick days in the past year, up from 5.8 before the pandemic. It's blaming stress, COVID and the cost of living crisis. The biggest cause for long-term absences is poor mental health. And vehicle scams have soared by 74%, costing victims, on average, almost £1,000. Potential buyers are being duped by fake posts on social media, advertising vehicles that don't exist. They'll often be encouraged to pay a deposit, and sometimes they're even paying the full amount up front, despite not seeing the car in person. People aged between 25 and 34 are those most likely to be stung. We are live across the UK in your car radio, on digital radio, on your smart speaker too. Just say play GB News. That's it from me. Now back to Patrick.
Massive show coming your way today, because today Suella Braverman is expected to stand on the world stage and tell the world what it needs to hear. That the current laws and definitions around refugees, asylum seekers and illegal migrants are outdated, nonsensical and in need of urgent change. It is time for Britain to be world leading when it comes to common sense. It should be common sense that somebody who enters your country illegally, having passed through numerous safe countries, and then makes a spurious case for asylum, they should be classed as an illegal immigrant. That is essentially what the government's illegal migration bill seeks to do. But of course, it goes against the UN, which forces nations to not discriminate against those who illegally cross borders and break into nations. That, quite clearly in my view, needs to change, and that, I believe, is what she's going to ask for. Her case centres around the number 780 million. It's a large number, isn't it? But that is the amount of people that she claims will be able to class themselves as refugees under the current outdated definition. Well, where are they heading? I mean, Europe, mostly, and Britain may well be their final destination. That is unsustainable, that is ridiculous, and it needs to be stopped. The world needs to accept that. Secondly, she will say that being gay or a woman doesn't give you an automatic right to asylum. This has caused a huge amount of controversy. But she's right. You shouldn't have an automatic right to asylum based on your gender or your alleged sexual orientation. There has to be a genuine case for persecution. But that is also based on the other and arguably most important point that she, as we understand, is set to make. The treaty currently obliges signatories to take in people coming directly from a place where their life or freedom is at threat. But UK courts often approve claims from people who have spent time in other safe countries before reaching Britain, an interpretation that is shared by the UN High Commissioner on Refugees. This is madness, and this is wrong. That promotes fake refugee tourism, and that is what Britain is facing at the moment. She is set to say that nobody coming across the Channel from France is in urgent need. Good. This is what everybody should think. France is a safe country, and people make a personal choice as to whether or not they want to get in a boat and come to Britain. What we have here, by the looks of things, is the Home Secretary standing up for Britain's direct interests and the British public on the world stage, and saying what too many world leaders are too afraid to say. She's got more balls than most people, and I say all power to her. The UN Refugee Convention needs reform. Everyone can see it, but apparently it's only the Home Secretary from Britain who's willing to stick her neck out and tell everyone how it really is. Good on her. Look, we're gearing up for this big speech here. It's supposed to take place at around 3:30. We will have all the controversy afterwards as well, from the usual types, no doubt. GBviews at GBnews.com. If she goes on to say that 780 million people are potentially on their way to Europe or Britain, that people crossing the Channel are not in urgent need, that we need to change the definition of a refugee and asylum seeker in order to meet modern standards, basically, and stop economic grifters, would she have your full support? Do you think that other world leaders actually will fall in line behind her? But crucially, she is, and as she well knows, she is about to face a barrage of criticism and hate from people. And it takes stern stuff to know that and do it. Most people haven't got that. Well, the Italian island of Lampedusa is, of course, the gateway to Europe for many migrants. And our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is there for us. Mark, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you there on the ground at this moment in time, and it times perfectly with what Suella Braverman is, as we expect, about to say. So could you give us a little bit of a heads up on that? And you are at the absolute coalface of the kind of thing that she's talking about. 780 million people potentially about to enter Europe as a result of our current definition of refugees. Take it away, Mark.
Well, that's certainly the number that would be eligible for refugee status if they were to move and to claim it. But obviously, only a fraction of that number are on the move at the moment. We don't know what the future holds. But this is very much the front line of Europe's migration crisis. It is Europe's most southerly island in the Mediterranean. And already so far, since just June, 62,000 people have crossed, and they have been processed here at the migrant centre for the Red Cross in Lampedusa. And in terms of Italy as a whole, so people that have come to Lampedusa, to other Italian islands and to the mainland, already this year, Patrick, it's 130,000 who've crossed. The Italian government believe that it will easily top 200,000 by the end of the year. So that just gives you an indication of how significant the problem is. That's one country reporting 200,000 likely migrants by the end of the year. But that doesn't take into consideration those migrants who are crossing in their thousands to the Greek islands, or indeed to Spanish islands in the Mediterranean, and over the other side in the Atlantic going up to the Canaries, and all the other routes that are coming into the European Union through the Western Balkans and other routes. As I say, Patrick, here it's been a particularly busy period. Just a week ago, 11,000 migrants crossed the Mediterranean. What they're doing at the moment, you can see all of the activity here, police activity, as well as Red Cross volunteers. They're rushing to ensure that this migrant centre is empty to be able to deal with what they believe will be another rush of migrant boats when the winds die down that have been busy over the last 5 days ago, have been quite high, the winds. I was speaking to Serena Cornelia, who is the supervisor for all of the Red Cross camps across Italy, and she gave us an indication of just how they're preparing.
If you have a lot of people, it's more difficult to give the support, but we try to give food, give kit, give psychological support and health support to all the people inside the center. We have specialized team of psychologists, doctors and operators and volunteers that work with minors. So we have tried to take care of all the people inside the center.
And how are you preparing for the possibility of more boats when the weather improves?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we are preparing kits with clothes, hygiene kits, food kits in the way to be prepared at the arrival.
Now, you can understand how many people in the UK might feel that this sweltering hot Italian island just not that far from the North African coast is really relevant to what they are living day to day in the UK. But we know, because previous crossings have told us so, that many of the migrants who cross into southern Europe from North Africa eventually make their way up to the northwest coast of France, get across to the UK, and then enter many hundreds of hotels right across the country, depriving communities of that much needed facility.
About 3:30, we're going to go to Washington and hear from Suella Braverman. She's talking about it on the international stage. You're there in Lampedusa, which is a gateway for many people to, as you've just said, then travel through Europe and get to places like Dunkirk, Mark, where there's been rather a lot of activity today.
Yeah, there's been a lot of activity on the northwest French coast, and that's because, Patrick, just like here in Lampedusa, where the winds have played a part in stopping the small boats for the past 5 days, it's been the same in the English Channel, but for a longer period, 9 days. But the French police, the riot police, the CRS, moved in first thing this morning to a migrant camp near Dunkirk, a camp home to hundreds of migrants. The human rights group Utopia 56 were commenting on this raid, saying it's just going to worsen the situation for those migrants, men, women and children in these camps. However, the French police are unapologetic. They say they have no right to be there. They are there gathering to break the law, to cross illegally to the United Kingdom in these small boats. So the police will continue with what are fairly regular operations when these camps get bigger in size. And it comes, this raid near Dunkirk, really just a few hours after the body of a migrant was found on a beach at Calais. That 24-year-old Eritrean woman had been getting on board one of 4 small boats that made it to the UK this morning. When she slipped and fell off that boat into the water, she didn't make it to the shore alive, and her body was found just before 6 o'clock this morning near a beach in Calais.
No, indeed. Look, Mark, thank you very much. Mark Wyther, our Home and Security Editor from Lampedusa. Now, as I was saying, we're expecting to hear from Suella Braverman live in about 10 minutes' time or so. Look, I have made my views pretty clear on it, and the views in the inbox are very clear as well. gbviews@gbnews.com about the strength of feeling towards Suella Braverman standing up and calling for a change to the definition of what a refugee is, and maybe a bit of common sense about the actual scale of the crisis and whether or not people should be classed as refugees and asylum seekers in all circumstances. But of course, that's not a universal view, far from it. And ahead of Suella Braverman's speech, I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined by Michael Walker from Novara Media. Michael, thank you very, very much. Can we just start with your overview, really, assessment of what we understand that Suella Braverman's going to say? I've outlined it previously. What was your take?
Well, I think it's political grandstanding. And I suppose the reason I say that is because I don't think it actually solves any of the challenges that Europe currently faces. So talking about LGBT people, and it has to be persecution as opposed to discrimination. Now, 2% of asylum applications last year involved a claim about being LGBT. And I don't think many people are saying, oh, I feel uncomfortable at work, right? This is people who are coming from countries such as Afghanistan. There are many countries in sub-Saharan Africa where it's illegal to be gay, where you have the death penalty for being gay. So the idea that we're letting in lots of people for merely being discriminated for not getting the promotion they want is just a joke, frankly. That is not going to resolve anything. That's not going to change who counts as a refugee, because those people aren't being counted as a refugee anyway. The other big issue she is, or the big claim she is trying to make, what she thinks will be this revolutionary change, is saying that if people come through a safe country, they aren't genuine refugees. Now, at the moment, the Refugee Convention does allow you to send back people to a safe country. So Britain, if we wanted to, according to the Refugee Convention, could say, well, if you come from France, we think you've come from a safe place, so we'll send you back to France. What the Refugee Convention doesn't allow you to do is send someone back to a country which is deemed unsafe. And what's stopping us sending people back to France isn't the Refugee Convention, it's that we don't have a deal with France. Now, there is a sort of logical problem with this idea that people should always claim asylum in the first safe country they arrive in, which is, what about those safe countries, right? Why would Greece, who are already accepting way more refugees than we are, why would Italy, that's already receiving way more refugees than we are, suddenly say, OK, fine, if they get to the UK, we'll also take them back here? Why should we have such a smaller burden than those countries which are on the border of Europe? I don't see why anyone else would accept that.
Yeah, I suspect that what we will end up with, I mean, what we arguably should end up with at some point in the future, is a change in the definition of what a refugee or asylum seeker is to meet with modern standards, which means that it is less easy for basically anyone to claim that they're a refugee or an asylum seeker. So you reduce the number of people who would have a valid claim, and then the world as a whole has some kind of international quota system for those people so that the burden is more manageable. Would you go along with that?
Well, I mean, I think a global quota system would be sensible. I mean, we're a very long way away from that. So at the moment, this seems like, well, I suppose one way of putting it is I would be in favour of a global quota system, but Britain at the moment is taking less than its fair share. So we're throwing our toys out of the pram because we've got 80,000 people arriving. Germany has 300,000 people arriving. France has 200,000 people arriving. Why is it us as a country?
Is geography not a part? Yeah, I suppose, look, I mean, is geography not a massive part of that, Michael? You know, I mean, if you look at the size of Germany or the size of France compared to us, I mean, that would be my argument against that.
No, I think this argument about geography is somewhat silly. I mean, there's lots of space in Britain. We aren't one of the most densely populated places in the world.
But not a lot of that space has housing on it, does it?
I don't think it's geographical. Sorry, what did you say?
Not a lot of that space has actual housing on it. We might have green fields, but we'd have to then build more places just specifically for refugees and asylum seekers, which I think Suella Braverman will probably be against.
Refugees and asylum seekers. I think there is a problem here whereby, for some reason, in Britain, we can't build high-speed rail, we can't build houses, and therefore we say, oh, we can't possibly take any refugees. Now, why would France and Germany say, oh, we'll send your refugees back here because we accept you can't build houses, right? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'd also like to push back against this idea that anyone can claim to be a refugee. That's not the case. It's incredibly difficult. And if you look at the nationalities where people are being accepted as refugees when they come to the UK, it's places such as Afghanistan that we occupied for 20 years, people who helped the British Army and then were abandoned. It's places such as Iran, where we currently have crippling sanctions on them. So we've crippled the economy, and now we complain when people come here from there.
Just a quick...
The idea that anyone willy-nilly can claim asylum is just not borne out in
just a quick one, Mark, with you, if that's all right, which is that, I mean, it's already happening, the massive backlash, and once she talks, the big backlash is going to be accusations of Suella Braverman being homophobic and misogynistic because she's saying that, you know, just simply by virtue of being gay or a woman, you're not going to be able to claim asylum. You have to, I think she's going to have to say something like you're going to have to show serious evidence of persecution. Do you think that that is a homophobic thing to say?
Well, it's not a homophobic policy, but it's not a policy that is already, it's not different to what we already do. Of course, being gay or being a woman isn't enough to get asylum. You have to demonstrate persecution, but you currently already have to demonstrate persecution. So if there were to be a claim about homophobia, I'd say, why is she making a big deal about this completely irrelevant policy? She seems to be trying to say that people just saying they're gay and they're getting asylum is a big problem. But it's not. That's not the reality. So you do have to ask a question. Why is a politician making a big scare story out of something that isn't happening? And potentially, that might be to whip up homophobia.
OK, interesting. We'll have to wait and see. Michael, thank you very much. Michael Walker there from Novara Media. Just a little bit of a preemption there to what we expect Suella Braverman to say. Very much two sides of the coin here. Michael's view, and a lot of people on the left, will be, hey, what you're saying here is rearranging the decking on the Titanic, and we're not actually going to see any real action. Other people will say it is time that the world heard a world leader, or a Home Secretary at least, come out and say what many people are thinking, which is that a lot of these asylum seekers or refugees are not genuine, and that we need to change the definition, and that actually we cannot have something like 780 million people over the course of the next few decades making their way to Europe. We have to make it harder for them, and that channel migrants are not genuine asylum seekers. More on this story on our website right now, gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news site in the country. It's got the best analysis, big opinion, and all the latest breaking news, which we will bring to you very shortly, because we're building up to Suella Braverman's big speech. We'll bring that live to you at 3:30. It's just a few moments away. Patrick Christys here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain.
Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, there's not long now until Suella Braverman's big speech on migration. There you go. That's the room. At 3:30, it's expected that she will be there in Washington, D.C. We will bring it to you live right here on GB News. Huge expectations of what she's set to say. She's set to raise the alarm by saying that around 780 million people could, if they wanted to, claim refugee status under the current rules and regs, and that international definition of refugees needs to change to adapt to the modern world. She's also expected to say that people in urgent need are not those crossing the channel. Why? Because they are in safe countries, and that we should not be expected to take those people. What that means for the international community, it remains to be seen. She's also expected to make some comments about LGBT people and women having too much of an easy right to asylum, potentially. So we'll be talking about all of this. Let's speak now, though, ahead of all of this with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. He's been a busy boy because he's been at Liberal Democrat conference. He's been listening to Ed Davey for his sins, and very shortly he's going to be listening to Suella Braverman with us as well. I'm not sure Tom can quite hear us there, so we'll just come back to me for now. Look, it could be seismic, this, for Suella Braverman, because she is on the world stage. One would imagine it will have been signed off by Rishi Sunak, and it's expected to be incredibly punchy stuff. If she stands up there and says that the world now needs to accept that the world has moved on, and that the definition that we've had of refugees was designed for a time that no longer exists, and now we have millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people from parts of Africa and the Middle East who are desperate to make asylum claims and refugee claims in the Western world, and that cannot happen for the sustainability of society. It's a numbers game, potentially also a cultural game as well. If she stands up and says that, that would be a British Home Secretary on the world stage, potentially leading the world in terms of sticking her head above the parapet. A lot of other world leaders are simply not prepared to do that, are they? For fear of the inevitable massive backlash that is already coming her way. I don't know about you, but I am braced for the pearl clutching to begin shortly after she finishes talking. Our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, I believe we now have. Tom, yes, we do. Thank you very, very much. So, Tom, Suella Braverman, how big a moment do you think this could be for her and for Britain?
Well, it's certainly significant, it's certainly audacious. Of course, Suella Braverman will not only be speaking to her American audience at the American Enterprise Institute today in DC, there are clearly lines in this speech designed for a domestic audience, but also for this to succeed, it needs to reach out beyond these two countries to an international audience, to build a consensus on updating this system, on updating this 70-plus-year-old system of dealing with migrants, of dealing indeed with asylum seekers
now. I'm sorry about this, Tom. We're going to have to cut across
from a time before mass
and go
migration.
now to Washington, D.C., where I believe that Suella Braverman is just about to take the stage. Suella is there shortly, I think. Yep, there we go. So she's on the stage at the moment. She's being introduced. This is her in Washington, D.C., where she's expected to make an announcement, or a statement anyway, about the international definition of a refugee, that the UN Refugee Convention is in need of being overhauled. Let's just hear what is being said in there now.
Presented challenges on multiple fronts at once for all of us: humanitarian, economic, political, cultural, legal, and many more. Every Western government has had to find some ways to respond to these in a way that lives up to our obligations to people in need of protection around the world and to their obligations to their own citizens. And that has to mean, in part, working together, learning from each other, seeking some common ways forward. The US and the UK, given all that we have in common, might particularly benefit from that kind of exchange of ideas. And that's the sort of conversation that we hope to be starting today. Britain's Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is the UK's leading policymaker on this front, as well as in related areas like law enforcement, crime, and much of what we here in America would call homeland security. She's in Washington this week to meet with senior administration officials, with members of Congress and others on the full range of issues in her Home Office purview, but especially the refugee and global migration dilemma. And we're very pleased that she could take some time to offer us her thoughts on those challenges today. She'll speak for 30 minutes or so, then we'll have a brief discussion and a few questions in the room. And with that, Home Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the welcome. It is always a great pleasure to be here in America, and it's a particular privilege to be speaking at the American Enterprise Institute, an organisation that has contributed so much to the intellectual foundations of the conservative movement in the US and the UK, and to our public life more broadly. Some of those affiliated with AEI have had a significant impact on my own thinking. Thomas Sowell, James Q. Wilson, Justice Scalia, and Britain's Sir Roger Scruton, who was a visiting scholar here for several years. Now I'm here in America to talk about a critical and shared global challenge: uncontrolled and illegal migration. It's an existential challenge for the political and cultural institutions of the West. Just as it's a basic rule of history that nations which cannot defend their borders will not long survive, it is a basic rule of politics that political systems which cannot control their borders will not maintain the consent of the people and thus not long endure. You do not have to be a clairvoyant to see how might this all unfold. To understand the future, cast your mind back a couple of weeks and a few thousand miles southeast of here to the tiny Italian island of Lampedusa, population then 6,000. Lampedusa, where in a 24-hour period beginning on the 12th of September, over 120 boats carrying more than 5,000 illegal migrants made the 100-mile crossing from Tunisia in Africa to Italy. Within 48 hours, illegal arrivals outnumbered the local population, and a state of emergency had been declared. By the 20th of September, at least 11,000 had landed, with migrants sleeping in the street, stealing food and clashing with the police. These 11,000 are part of the estimated 133,000 people who've already come to Italy illegally by sea in the first 6 months of this year. That number is almost double the number of arrivals at the same point in 2022. And in 2022, a total of 330,000 illegal border crossings into the EU were detected, an increase of 66% compared to 2021. Of course, it's worth noting that most numbers relating to illegal migration are approximations. Nobody knows the true number of illegal arrivals, and estimates in this area very rarely turn out to be lower. America faces similar challenges. Thousands of people illegally cross the border on a daily basis. Illegal migration to the US has in recent years gone from just under 2 million in 2021 to more than 2.8 million this year. Illegal migration is not merely an event-driven or cyclical problem. It's a permanent and structural challenge for the developed nations in general and the West in particular. Unless we act, it will only worsen in the years to come. War, political instability and climate change will of course exacerbate migration flows. According to the UN, at the end of 2022, there were over 108 million forcibly displaced people globally, with 29 million considered to be refugees by the UNHCR. But we must be honest. The fundamental drivers of this epoch-defining challenge are economics and demography. In January, the World Economic Forum said that migration will become one of the top 5 global risks in the next decade, ahead of national resource crisis, geo-economic confrontation and environmental disasters. It's a fallacy that as countries get richer, emigration from them declines. As the American economist Michael Clemens has found, emigration from a country tends to rise until it reaches a level of income of about $10,000 per person before declining. World Bank data show that more than 3 billion people live in countries where the average income is below this threshold. the potential for migration to increase yet further is truly colossal. The raw numbers show how demand for migration, legal or otherwise, is likely to surge in the coming years. So too does personal testimony. A 2021 Gallup poll found that 16% of adults worldwide, around 900 million people, would like permanently to leave their own country. And those numbers are not evenly distributed around the world. 37% of people living in sub-Saharan Africa, some 481 million people, and 27% of those living in the Middle East and North Africa, around 156 million, say they'd like to migrate. The ease with which some of them might reach Europe poses a unique and deepening challenge. The fact is that our countries are exceptionally attractive. 4% of those polled by Gallup, approximately 40 million people, named Britain as their preferred destination. 18%, approximately 162 million people, named the USA. These numbers are respectively more than half of our current total populations. Now, those in favour of a more liberal approach when it comes to legal migration tend to say at this point, so what? Isn't it a good thing that people the world over want to come to the West and contribute? And why can't we absorb and welcome them? And wouldn't the problem of illegal migration be significantly reduced if we made it easier for people to come to our countries legally? Well, there are four core arguments in opposition to uncontrolled and illegal migration: the civic argument, the practical argument, the security argument, and the democratic argument. Firstly, the civic argument against uncontrolled and illegal migration. I believe that the nation-state is one of humanity's great civilizing forces. It creates a shared identity and a shared purpose, and that does not need to have a racial component. Typically, it binds people of different racial backgrounds together. Far from being an ugly emotion, patriotism stirs people to heroism and to kindness. It is the belief that we have specific obligations to others precisely because they are our fellow countrymen. And in order for nationality to be sustainable, economically, culturally, and in terms of public support, it needs to encompass everyone. That, in turn, means that the country cannot grow exponentially and still maintain the harmony needed for everyone to feel that we are all in this together. And let's remember something that is all too often forgotten. Integration inevitably takes time. If immigration is uncontrolled, it makes it harder for society to adapt and accommodate new cultures and customs, and for communities to meld together. Uncontrolled immigration, inadequate integration, and a misguided dogma of multiculturalism have proven a toxic combination for Europe over the last few decades. I'm not the first to point this out. In 2010, Angela Merkel gave a speech in which she acknowledged that multiculturalism had utterly failed. And then French President Nicolas Sarkozy and British Prime Minister David Cameron echoed similar sentiments shortly thereafter. Multiculturalism makes no demands of the incomer to integrate. It has failed because it allowed people to come to our society and live parallel lives in it. They could be in the society, but not of society. And in extreme cases, they could pursue lives aimed at undermining the stability and threatening the security of our society. We are living with the consequence of that failure today. You can see it play out in the streets all over Europe, from Malmo to Paris, Brussels to Leicester. It is 13 years since Merkel gave her speech, and I'm not sure that very much has changed since. If people are not able to settle in our countries and start to think of themselves as British, American, French or German, then something is going badly wrong. National identity is not something invented in an ivory tower or by advertising executives. The nation-state has endured because it means something real to almost all of us, and that is true the world over. Given how much it matters, it must be protected. Saying so does not make one anti-immigrant, nor does it mean you're anti-immigration. I am the child of immigrants, and it's no betrayal of my parents' story to say that immigration must be controlled. There is an optimal level of immigration. It is not zero. But there has been more migration to the UK and Europe in the last 25 years than in all the time that went before. It has been too much, too quick, with too little thought given to integration and the impact on social cohesion. And the fact that the optimal level is hard to define and will vary across time and for different countries doesn't change that fundamental fact. Nor should it blind us from this simple truth. If cultural change is too rapid and too big, then what was already there is diluted. Eventually, it will disappear. Secondly, the practical argument against uncontrolled and illegal migration. The unprecedented rise in illegal migration to the UK via small boat crossings from France has put unsustainable pressure on the UK's asylum system and the British taxpayer. Approximately 109,000 people have illegally crossed the Channel via small boats since 2018, including 45,000 alone last year. Consequently, the cost of the UK's asylum system has roughly doubled in the last year and now stands at nearly £4 billion. A decade ago, the total cost of the taxpayer was around £500 million. The UK is now spending £8 million a day on accommodating migrants in hotels. And we are not unique in these challenges, of course. In March, roughly 1/3 of all hotel rooms in Ireland were being used to accommodate asylum seekers and refugees. In New York City is accommodating some 40,000 migrants in hotels. Earlier this month, New York's Democratic Mayor Eric Adams exclaimed that the migrants' crisis will destroy New York City. Recent analysis suggests that it will cost New York approximately $10 billion annually to support the roughly 110,000 asylum seekers who have arrived there after crossing the southern border this year. Unless countries can prevent or rapidly remove illegal migrants, pressures on the state will compound over time. Accommodation cannot be magicked out of thin air, nor can new schools, improved roads, extra police officers, additional healthcare, or any of the other public services upon which people rely. Immigration is behind at least 45% of demand for new housing in England. More than 1 in 5 births are to foreign-born mothers. Due to immigration and high birth rates among foreign-born mothers, English secondary schools will need to find an extra 213,000 places by 2026 compared to 2020. And then, of course, there are the direct financial costs. A 2014 study by University College London concluded that almost no illegal migrants end up paying in taxes what they gained from the state in benefits. Thirdly, the national security case against uncontrolled and illegal migration. Illegal migration also poses obvious threats to public safety and national security. UK police chiefs have warned me of heightened levels of criminality connected to some small boat arrivals, particularly in relation to drug crime, exploitation and prostitution. People who choose to come across the Channel illegally from another safe country have already showed contempt for our laws. President Macron claimed that illegal migrants or those waiting for a residence permit accounted for more than half of crime in Paris. Illegal migration is increasingly a tool exploited by hostile states and those acting on their behalf. Vladimir Putin weaponized migration in 2021, sending thousands of asylum seekers via Belarus to try to cross into Poland and Lithuania. In March, Italy's defence minister said the exponential increase in the migratory phenomenon departing from African shores is also, to a not insignificant extent, part of a clear strategy of hybrid warfare that the Wagner division is implementing, using its considerable weight in some African countries. And fourthly, and perhaps most critically, the democratic case against uncontrolled and illegal migration. Opinion polls and successive national votes could not be clearer. People the world over want their governments to control their borders. The British public backed the UK's Rwanda partnership and the government's recent illegal migration act by margins of about 2-1. 6 in 10 in red wall seats support stopping migrants and small boats from illegally entering the UK by using any means necessary. 72% of EU citizens are in favour of reinforcing EU external borders. And more than half of Americans said there was an invasion at the southern border when polled in August 2022. Who we allow to come into our country and become one of us is a fundamental issue. Without public consent, immigration is illegitimate. Dismissing as idiots or bigots those members of the public who express legitimate concerns is not merely unfair, it is dangerous. Europe is at a critical juncture. The EU must find a way to meet the challenge of illegal migration. Ursula von der Leyen's recent visit to Lampedusa demonstrates the Commission's recognition of the severity of the situation. Because failure to do so I fear, undermine the legitimacy of democratic institutions and create the conditions for more extreme politics. The UK is working closely with our European allies, both on the continent and in joint efforts upstream, to combat the smuggling gang beyond Europe's borders. And we will always look for ways to deepen our cooperation on security. The most recent example is our new working arrangement with Frontex. To address where the solution to all of this might lie, I must first broach a taboo. One of the most significant but underappreciated factors contributing to the global migration crisis is the global asylum framework. By this I mean the various well-intentioned legal conventions and treaties that say in effect, if you are fleeing persecution somewhere, you are entitled to make a claim for asylum anywhere. And irrespective of whether you arrived illegally or passed through multiple safe countries along the way, a country must consider it. According to the UN, an estimated 50,000 people have died attempting dangerous and illegal migration since 2014, although the actual figure is almost certainly higher. About half of these deaths occurred while attempting to cross the Mediterranean. 1,000 people died last year trying to cross from Mexico to the US. And some 150 people have died attempting to cross the Channel by small boat, lorry or other clandestine means in the last 5 years. All of these people were no doubt seeking a better life. Some, perhaps many, were genuine refugees, but not all of them were. Seeking asylum and seeking better economic prospects are not the same thing. Seeking refuge in the first safe country you reach, or shopping around for your preferred destination, are not the same thing. Being trafficked, i.e. transported against your will, perhaps to be sold into sex slavery, and being smuggled, i.e. asking someone to sneak you into a country, are not the same thing. The extent to which the global asylum framework enables the obscuring of these categories creates huge incentives for illegal migration. This legal framework is rooted in the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. It was created to help resettle people fleeing persecution following the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust, and was, initially at least centred around Europe. It was an incredible achievement of its age. But more than 70 years on, we now live in a completely different time. Jet travel has transformed the cost and comparative ease of moving around the world. The internet has made people acutely aware of how different life is and how much higher wages are in other parts of the world. Smartphones enable smugglers to facilitate operations with great ease and smooth communication between those who have undertaken a journey and others who might like to. When the Refugee Convention was signed, it conferred protection on some 2 million people in Europe. According to analysis by Nick Timothy and Carl Williams for the Centre for Policy Studies, it now confers the notional right to move to another country upon at least 780 million people. It is therefore incumbent upon politicians and thought leaders to ask whether the Refugee Convention and the way it has come to be interpreted through our courts is fit for our modern age or in need of reform. Article 1 of the Convention defines the term refugee as applying to those who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, cannot safely reside in the country of their nationality. Elsewhere, the Convention speaks of life or freedom being threatened. I think most members of the public would recognise those fleeing a real risk of death, torture, oppression or violence as being in need of protection. However, as case law has developed, what we have seen in practice is an interpretive shift away from persecution in favour of something more akin to a definition of discrimination. And there has been a similar shift away from a well-founded fear towards a credible or plausible fear, the practical consequence of which has been to expand the number of those who may qualify for asylum and to lower the threshold for doing so. Let me be clear, there are vast swathes of the world where it is extremely difficult to be gay or to be a woman. Where individuals are being persecuted, it is right that we offer sanctuary. But we will not be able to sustain an asylum system if, in effect, simply being gay or a woman or fearful of discrimination in your country of origin is sufficient to qualify for protection. Article 31 of the Refugee Convention makes clear that it is intended to apply to individuals coming directly from a territory where their life was threatened. It also states that where people are crossing borders without permission, they should present themselves without delay to the authorities and must show good cause for any illegal entry. The UK, along with many others, including America, interpret this to mean that people should seek refuge and claim asylum in the first safe country that they reach. But NGOs and others, including the UN Refugee Agency, contest this. The status quo, where people are able to travel through multiple safe countries and even reside in safe countries for years while they pick and choose their preferred destination to claim asylum, is absurd and unsustainable. Nobody entering the UK by boat from France is fleeing imminent peril. None of them have good cause for illegal entry. The vast majority have passed through multiple other safe countries and in some instances have resided in safe countries for several years. There is a strong argument that they should cease to be treated as refugees during their onward movement. There are also many whose journeys originate from countries that the public would consider to be manifestly safe, like Turkey or Albania or India. In these instances, most are simply economic migrants, gaming the asylum system to their advantage. In Europe, we've added, through the European Convention on Human Rights, additional human rights laws. The global asylum framework is a promissory note that the West cannot fulfill. We have created a system of almost infinite supply, incentivizing millions of people to try their luck, knowing full well that we have no capacity to meet more than a fraction of the demand. Tragically, the ease with which this system can be gained by those that don't really need it means it is the most vulnerable, women, children, those without the money to pay people smugglers, and those not fit enough to make arduous journeys that lose out. In the UK, roughly 70% of those arriving illegally on small boat are men aged under 40. This is a hypocritical position for the West to maintain, and by creating a market for people smuggling, it is leading to considerable human suffering. So why has the international community so far collectively failed to explore any serious reform of the global asylum framework? I think there are two main reasons. The first is simply that it's very hard to renegotiate these instruments. If you think getting 27 EU member states to agree is difficult, try getting agreement at the United Nations. The second is much more cynical. The fear of being branded a racist or illiberal. Any attempt to reform the Refugee Convention will see you smeared as anti-refugee. Similar epithets are hurled at anyone who suggests reform of the ECHR or its court in Strasbourg. I reject the notion that a country cannot be expected to respect human rights if it is not signed up to an international human rights organisation. As if the UK doesn't have a proud history of human rights dating back to Magna Carta, and the ECHR is all that is holding us back from becoming Russia. America, Canada, New Zealand and Japan seem to manage just fine. None of this is particularly novel, nor should it be particularly controversial. As Home Secretary, Theresa May called for Britain to leave the ECHR, and it was Conservative Party policy under Michael Howard to leave the Refugee Convention. I'm merely advocating for reform. Now, while the underlying framework is both a contributing factor to the problem and a barrier to certain fixes, some countries have been more successful in tackling illegal migration than others. Australia had to cope with two major waves of illegal maritime migration across the Pacific in the last 2 decades. In the last wave, before they stopped the crossings, more than 52,000 unauthorised maritime arrivals and around 1,100 deaths at sea were recorded between 2008 and 2014. Operation Sovereign Borders saw migrant boats intercepted, and then those on board were either returned whence they had travelled or taken to immigration detention centres in third countries. There were some 400 illegal boat crossings in 2013, the year the operation was enacted. Within a year, the problem was eliminated. Denmark, between 2015 and 2016, announced a range of measures intended to make their asylum system significantly less attractive as a destination for illegal migration. The result was a reduction in claims from 21,000 in 2015 to 6,000 in 2016 and 1,500 in 2020. For every one asylum seeker that arrived in Denmark in 2021, 3 arrived in Sweden on a per capita basis. So unilateral and bilateral solutions and policies of deterrence can and do work. This is the route the UK has chosen to go down. In 2022, some 12,000 Albanians entered the UK illegally via small boat. In response, we strengthened how we worked with Albania, including improved data sharing, closer operational working, new expedited returns arrangements and financial support. These measures have seen the number of Albanian small boat arrivals fall by 90% so far during 2023. We also work closely with France. Last year, the Prime Minister signed a historic bilateral agreement to deepen our cooperation in combating illegal migration. That included significant investment to increase frontline staffing and policing levels in northern France, better real-time intelligence and data sharing, supported by embedded UK officers, and improved intelligence cooperation to increase disruptions, arrests and prosecutions. This sort of cooperation is necessary, but not sufficient in terms of results. Overall crossings are down more than 20% so far this year, compared with 2022. The system that we are working to deliver through our Legal Migration Act is one that, within the limitations of the broader rights-based framework, says that the only route to asylum in the UK must be a safe and legal route. Anyone who enters the UK illegally will be deemed inadmissible to our asylum system, and following assessment will be detained and swiftly removed to their home country if that's safe, or to a safe third country if not. In 2021, we signed our groundbreaking migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda. Under this agreement, Rwanda will accept physical and legal responsibility for illegal migrants relocated from the UK and look after all their needs while their claims are considered, with a full package to support their integration into Rwandan society. We always knew that our partnership would be challenged in court, and we remain confident that the UK Supreme Court will uphold the legality of the scheme later this year, enabling us to start putting it into operation. While our political opponents, NGOs and others dismissed the partnership as an immoral gimmick when it was first announced, it is striking how many countries run by governments of varying political hues have now expressed in public and in private conversations their support for this model. Many are now pursuing variations of their own. The UK will continue to prioritise policies of deterrence and border hardening alongside of safe and legal routes. At the same time, we will look to build consensus for more fundamental reform of the asylum framework at the international level. The goal for reform must be to embed certain principles in the global asylum framework. Deterring illegal migration must be an aim. Countries must have a say in what volume of refugees they are capable of resettling each year. Support and protection should, to the fullest extent possible, be rendered in neighbouring safe countries where it is most efficient to deliver and able to reach those that need it most. The only route to resettlement should be via safe and legal routes. People must claim asylum in the first safe country they reach. The definition of who qualifies for protection must be tightened, and policies of externalisation, such as our partnership with Rwanda, must be recognised as appropriate. I don't accept the false choice between acting unilaterally or even bilaterally to protect one's border and solving this problem through multilateral cooperation. International cooperation is essential if we are to find enduring solutions to the challenges of global migration and deliver an asylum framework fit for the modern age. But nations cannot simply sit on their hands while a reform process plays out. It is right that they act in their national interest. I have, in recent weeks, been meeting with fellow interior ministers in Europe. I will continue doing so in the coming months and hope to bring together partners to a forum where we can begin discussing some of the matters that I've touched on today. Is the Refugee Convention in need of reform? Would a revised global asylum framework work, and how would it look? How can we better balance national rights and human rights so that the latter do not undermine national sovereignty? Could the ECHR be more transparent and accountable in how it interprets human rights and give greater power to nation states to make arguments and present evidence? What are the appropriate criteria for being labelled a refugee these days in the 21st century? How can we stop human rights laws being gamed by smugglers? Are we delivering safe and legal routes in an efficient and effective manner? And while we may have different views as to the solutions, I hope we can at least agree on one thing: that we are living in a new world bound by outdated legal models. It's time that we acknowledge that. Thank you.
Well, that was Suella Braverman there, speaking in Washington, D.C. There is a heck of a lot to unpack there, so I'm going to do my best to whiz you through it now. She says that Europe and Britain is overwhelmingly attractive to asylum seekers and refugees. 40 million people say that they would currently like to come to Britain as their preferred destination. She went on to say that uncontrolled migration is a bad thing, the nation-state is great, patriotism is good, and that populations cannot grow too quickly because there will be no integration. What she said is that the misguided dogma of multiculturalism is, and I'm quoting now, toxic. She went on to say that there's been more immigration to the UK and Europe in the last 25 years than all the time that went before that. She said it was too much, too quick, and too little thought out on social cohesion and integration. She said a couple of very revealing things. Almost no illegal migrant ends up paying in tax what they've taken from the state. And I think that is a vital thing to get across. Almost no illegal migrant will end up paying in tax what they've taken from the state. So they will never be a net benefit, really, to Britain. She also said that controlling immigration is the democratic thing to do. And here she made a global point. She said people all over the world want governments to control borders. Half of Americans call it an invasion at the southern border. She said 72% of Europeans want the EU to have greater control of its external borders. I'm quoting now, seeking asylum and seeking better prospects are not the same thing, Braverman said. She was broaching a taboo. If you're fleeing persecution somewhere, you should not be able to seek asylum anywhere. And this is the point about vast swathes of the world where it's difficult to be gay or to be a woman. She said that we cannot sustain an asylum system if simply being afraid of persecution qualifies you to it. She says that the global community is too afraid of being called racist or illiberal to change the definition of refugees. And this is where she kind of built on this global sense there, where she said, Britain is really leading the way, I'm paraphrasing it, Britain is leading the way when it comes to the illegal migration bill, which of course would treat anybody who enters this country illegally as being unfit for asylum. The only way to obtain asylum or refugee status in Britain will be via safe and legal routes. She also said that we've got the Rwanda plan. She made a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment about how many countries initially condemned and opposed the Rwanda plan, but who now, she knows, would wish to copy it if they were allowed to. However, it is the international community and the international definition that is holding that back. And that is the key point that she was trying to make. She went on, as she was concluding, to say every single country should act in their own best national interests when it comes to border control and border security. And she has called on the world to adopt a new global framework. She is trying there to make a rallying cry to the world. And she finished by saying that we need to admit and acknowledge and crucially do something about the fact that we are living in a new world with outdated legal models when it comes to migration, both legal and illegal. Heck of a lot to unpack there. Get your views coming in on that, gbviews@gbnews.com. Is that the kind of statement that you would expect from a Home Secretary, putting Britain's interests first? People talk, don't they, about us being world-leading. That is a Home Secretary of our country on the world stage issuing a rallying cry to the world. But let's get more reaction now from Suella's big speech. And joining me from Washington, D.C., where that speech was taking place, is Niall Gardner, who's the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you very, very much, Niall. Great to have you on the show. Few key points there. Overwhelmingly, what she is calling for is for the world to adopt a new framework to deal and redefine what being a refugee and asylum seeker is, because otherwise, frankly, as she puts it, essentially it's the end of days.
Patrick, great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show today. I do think the Home Secretary's speech was one of the most important speeches, I think, by a British official on US soil in many years. And I think that she conveyed absolutely the right message, which is that illegal migration is unacceptable. It's a huge global crisis. Action has to be taken. And I think Suella Braverman was absolutely right to address the UN Convention on Refugees from 1951, but also the ECHR as well. And it is time, I think, for the world's leaders to address the fundamental threat posed by illegal migration and to act upon it. So it was a call to arms. I do think it was a very robust speech. It could have been stronger in some respects.
OK, go on. Talk to me about that then now. So how do you think she should have been stronger?
Yeah, I think that, firstly, she should have talked about Britain leaving the ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights. The reality is that the UK cannot deal with the migrant crisis unless it leaves the ECHR. That is the reality. Now, there's a lot of debate in Cabinet over this. The Prime Minister has not yet adopted that position. And this is why I think the speech did not go down that particular path. But the UK has to get out of the ECHR. It is a shackle for the British people. If the UK is to be truly sovereign, it has to leave the European Convention. Now, also, of course, she addressed the UN Refugee Convention. She called for it to be reformed. The reality is that reform within the United Nations is virtually impossible. And I think that...
And she went on to say now that really she thought it was impossible for a reason that I think many people will agree with. The international community, as indeed many individuals are too afraid of being called racist or illiberal in order to deal with a very real problem. And in essence, that they would probably rather sit back and watch the world burn as opposed to actually sticking their head above the parapet and doing something. Yeah. And it's on that, Niall, that I'll put my final point to you, which is Suella Braverman, I think, has been incredibly brave today, standing up and actually saying a lot of stuff that she knows other people are too afraid to say.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a courageous speech, a brave speech. She said a lot of tremendous things here that reflect the British national interest. Full credit to Suella Braverman for delivering this address. It's an address, of course, that the Biden administration will absolutely hate, which is all the more reason why this is a good speech on US soil.
Yeah, look, Niall, thank you very much. Great to have you hot off the press there of Suella Braverman. It's Niall Gardner there, the director of the Margaret Thatcher Foundation, which, of course, is in Washington, D.C., where Suella Braverman was. It's my pleasure to say I'm now joined by Conservative MP Craig McKinley. Craig, thank you very much. It has the feel of a historic speech, that, I think, from Suella Braverman. She was trying to bring in, soften it potentially, quotes from people like Angela Merkel saying that multiculturalism has failed, saying that national identity in the nation-state has endured because it means something to all of us, and that must be protected. What was your overall takeaway from what you heard there from Suella?
I'm really pleased that, what has seemed to have been the unspoken things that nobody's brave enough to talk about, well, brave Braverman is actually now saying it. And I think she is very much striking a chord with most British people who can see that the old United Nations Convention of 1951, a very, very different world, really only anticipating 2 or 3 million people that would be affected or improved by it. And Suella's come up with 780 million people would potentially get through under the terms and the interpretations of that convention that is now, what are we, 72 years old. The world has changed massively. The potential for movement of people has changed massively. And you only have to look at what's happening, an amassing of a lot of generally young men in Libya at the moment, trying to get over to Lampedusa and then into the EU, and no doubt some will try and get here.
She called it, Craig, just on that, she essentially called that an act of modern warfare. She alluded to intelligence which suggests that groups like the Wagner Group, linked to Putin and Russia, are helping with the migrant crisis and with an invasion of Europe by people as an act of modern warfare. I thought that was incredibly strong.
That is a strong statement, but we saw it already in the build-up, or just after the Ukraine war started, with what was happening on the Belarus-Polish border. There was, I think, an anticipation of creating instability in Poland, a very big supporter of Ukraine, to actually allow Belarus to be, if you like, a soft underbelly route into the European Union. Belarus didn't really require any visas or anything else from people traveling to Minsk on international airlines, and they then went over to the Polish border. And at the time, even the UK Army was helping Poland to actually protect that border. And I understand over the last few days, similar is happening again. But what the debate that we have to have is, what is a genuine refugee?
Yeah.
And I think we will know one if we see one. They are most certainly the women and children that have come out of Ukraine. I struggle to see that these are particularly Albanians. I mean, that was just a ridiculous state of affairs we saw last year. Thankfully, a Turner's agreement has now come into place, and those numbers have reduced. But the sort of the flimsiness of the interpretation, I think, has been now flexed beyond any credible reason. Suella said there's potentially 780 million people. You could, anticipate Myanmar, old Burma and old money. That is under a dreadful regime. The potential of 53 million people would have a right under these conventions. Now, no matter how heartfelt we all are, the reality is our nations cannot support this number of people. And I think the interpretations, particularly about economic migrants, seems to be the one that we're not prepared to say. And I'm sorry, I do not believe that all of these young men trying to go from Libya into Lampedusa are genuine refugees. No. They're having a hard time in some tough countries.
That's it.
And I'm afraid that isn't the interpretation. And you look what's happening in the US as well. They have got massive border incursions. And the last time I looked, most of South America, tough place to be, but I don't think really goes along with the UN Convention.
That's it, right. So she's calling for common sense on the world stage now, as in she wants the international community to wake up and say what we need to do as a planet is say, essentially, that some people have a better lot in life than others, and that might be regrettable. But your case for actually being a refugee or an asylum seeker and allowing to enter a country illegally and then stay there should not be determined about whether or not you just want a better life, which I think, frankly, most people, I dare say, probably would agree with, right? Most people probably would agree with. But she makes this point that there are 4 cases for us doing something as an international community, updating the UN Refugee Convention and basically controlling borders. She says that was civic, and she went to make the point about immigration, for example, is responsible for 45% of new housing demands. She says that schools will have to find 213,000 new places by 2026. 1 in 5 births are to foreign-born mothers in the UK, she said. She said security. She then looked internationally, well, not that far, but she went to Paris, and said that half of crime now, apparently in Paris, according to Emmanuel Macron, is as a result of illegal migration. Fascinating, if true, of course. Practical, we all know what the practical problems there are. And democratic, and that's where she said 72% of Europeans want tighter external border control. Half of Americans would call what's going on at the southern border an invasion. Those are compelling arguments. If the international community does not react to this, and if they are, as she suggests, too afraid of being called racist and illiberal to do anything about it, then where does that leave us, Craig? Do we have to leave the ECHR? What do we do if the world does nothing?
Well, the ECHR certainly has not helped our position. I've not been one of those that have been clamouring to leave the ECHR, even though I would very much support it if it was put on the table. And I'll give you one of the figures that I find quite remarkable. We've got a lot of our problems are domestically created. We've created pull factors for ourselves. Under the same UN convention, the same ECHR, the average yes rate for a refugee application across the EU is a mere 15 to 20%. Ours is 75% based on the same framework and the same menu. I've always found that rather intriguing. So is it little wonder that people say, do you know what, I'm going to pass through all those safe countries in the EU. They could settle in any of them. And let's try give it a go in the UK, because if we can get over there for a mere £4,000 at the hands of a people smuggler, I've got a much better chance of getting a successful application. And what else? Yeah. It's nice to be put in some great accommodation over a long period and the opportunity of working in the underground economy. So I think a lot of this is of our making as well. But the really key point here, Patrick, is it's all very well having these lovely international accords, and they're all soft and cozy when they're written and discussed. But when they hit the ground of democracy and it does not accord with what our people want, then I'm afraid there is only one master in our nation. That is the people, and that is what Parliament needs to deliver. It's getting that serious now. It really is getting that serious.
That's really the point she's trying to make, which is to emphasise to the world how serious this is for the world, not just for Britain. She finished by saying we are living in a new world bound by outdated legal models, and that is essentially it. Craig, final question to you. Was that just an audition to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, do you think? And if so, was it a good one?
I don't think so. No, well, it's great red meat for, I think, most of the population. It shouldn't be throwing red meat to the population. These should be standard things that a sensible government should do and provide. It's the sort of thing that I espouse, because I know that this is what my population, my electorate in South Thanet want to hear and they want to see delivered. So, no, I think we should forget the sort of electioneer and all the rest of it. This is, frankly, the right thing to do, and I take my hat off to her.
It's interesting, actually. I've just seen a tweet out from Emmanuel. Thank you, Craig, by the way. I'll leave that there. Craig McKinley, great stuff. Thank you very much for coming on. That's Conservative MP for Thanet. I've just seen a tweet which appears to quote Emmanuel Macron, saying we cannot embrace all the misery of the world, which is interesting. If indeed that is the initial international reaction to what we've just heard there from Suella Braverman, then I think maybe she's onto something. But let's go now to the Italian island of Lampedusa, which is the gateway to Europe for so many migrants, the kind of people there that Suella Braverman was talking about, with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, thank you very much. Well, yeah, reaction there, of course, to Suella Braverman's speech. And also, you are very much at the epicentre of the kind of thing she's talking about. You know, potentially millions of people getting to islands like Lampedusa, getting into Europe, Mark.
Yes, I mean, she has highlighted how she believes that when it comes to the Refugee Convention in particular, she believes that that system, that asylum system, is being gamed. And really, in some startling facts, she highlighted that really should bring it home to lots of people in the UK about how the asylum system is impacting on other nations. We know that there are 50,000 people, asylum seekers, who are in hotel accommodation in the UK, but Suella Braverman telling our audience there that in March of this year, one-third of all the hotels in Ireland were given up for use by asylum seekers. Now, that's a country, of course, that relies on hotels for its very significant tourism trade. New York, another city that has a very big tourist trade, 40,000 hotel rooms are being given over to asylum seekers as well. So very significant impacts in multiple places around the world, which is why Suella Braverman wants to see Western countries in particular coming together on this issue. And she really pointed to Lampedusa as being the front line of the crisis in Europe and highlighted to her audience just what Lampedusa has had to suffer in recent months. This is what she said.
Lampedusa, where in a 24-hour period beginning on the 12th of September, over 120 boats carrying more than 5,000 illegal migrants made the 100-mile crossing from Tunisia in Africa to Italy. Within 48 hours, illegal arrivals outnumbered the local population and a state of emergency had been declared. By the 20th of September, at least 11,000 had landed, with migrants sleeping in the street, stealing food and clashing with the police. These 11,000 are part of the estimated 133,000 people who've already come to Italy illegally by sea in the first 6 months of this year. That number is almost double the number of arrivals at the same point in 2022.
And the people of Lampedusa are really feeling this migration crisis acutely. Where we are now is down at the harbour as these winds blow, the winds that are preventing the migrant boats from coming. The rain is starting now as well. But down here in the harbour, you can see the fishing boats there. They're tied up for the moment because of the winds here. They're not able to go out to sea. But fishermen that we've been speaking to, Patrick, have told us that it's been very difficult for them in recent months because so many of these boats, you heard Suella Braverman saying 120 boats that had crossed in just a 24-hour period. Well, they see these boats out at sea and then they have to intervene to help them because of the rules at sea of saving lives, and that means their work for the day is effectively over. They have to wait for the Coast Guard to come and pick them up. And just next to the fishing boat here actually is one of those Coast Guard vessels gearing up for what they know will be another sustained and busy period, a surge that they're expecting later in the week when this windy condition that's sweeping through the island at the moment, the wind and the rain, that subsides and we get back to what we expect at this time of year, more Mediterranean type conditions. But we were speaking a little earlier to one of the senior Red Cross officials on the island, Serena Cornelia, who told us what they were doing to prepare for this migrant surge later in the week.
A lot of people is more difficult to give the support, but we try to give food, give kit, give psychological support and health support to all the people inside the center. We have specialized team of psychologists, doctors and operators and volunteers that work with minors. So we have tried to take care of all the people inside the center.
And how are you preparing for the possibility of more boats when the weather improves?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we are preparing kits with clothes, hygiene kits, food kits in the way to be prepared at the arrival.
Well, with no sign of the migrant boats yet, understandably, because they could never cross in these conditions, the Coast Guard is just on standby. The helicopter was up sweeping over the coastline earlier today, but all of the Coast Guard and the police patrol vessels are in port waiting for, we think, about Wednesday into Thursday is when these conditions will begin to subside.
OK, great stuff. Look, Mark, thank you very, very much. You won't need your Factor 50 today, that's for sure. Mark White, there, our Home and Security Editor in a windy and rainy Lampedusa. Look, massive intervention that from the Home Secretary in Washington. As you've been hearing, she's really stuck it to the international community, trying to shift the focus away from potentially Britain's own shortcomings, i.e. we can't control the boats at the moment, and saying the international community needs to do a heck of a lot more and that they are afraid of being called racist and illiberal for not changing the definition of what a refugee is and urging them to do it before it's too late. She says the case for border control in every country is civic, it is about security, it is about democracy as well. And, of course, it's about practicality. It was an incredibly strong speech. I'm going to go to your views very shortly. gbviews@gbnews.com. Overwhelmingly positive so far. I will try and get to your email shortly. More on this on our website right now, and gbnews.com is the place to be. Fastest growing national news site in the country. All the best analysis, big opinion, and, of course, all the latest breaking news. Loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. A woman who helped organise the Black Lives Matter protest, which saw slave trader Edward Colston's statue toppled, has admitted fraud. Interesting choice of attire there on the way into court. First is your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories. The Home Secretary has said today migrants arriving in small boats had put an unsustainable pressure on the UK's asylum system and the British taxpayer. Delivering her speech in Washington today, Suella Braverman also argued that being discriminated against for being gay or a woman wasn't enough to qualify for asylum. Also in the news today, the Mayor of Greater Manchester says he could take legal action against the government if the northern leg of HS2 is scrapped. Andy Burnham says Labour will build HS2 if it wins the election because a failure to do so would have massive implications for the north.
Where individuals are being persecuted, it is right that we offer sanctuary. But we will not be able to sustain an asylum system if, in effect, simply being gay or a woman, or fearful of discrimination in your country of origin, is sufficient to qualify for protection.
And that was Suella Braverman speaking in Washington a short time ago. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers ease overnight with clear skies for many of us. A fine start to Wednesday, but then Storm Agnes turns up with the potential for disruptive wind and rain. Still some rain going across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England through the evening, but eventually the showers become confined to central and the far northwest of Scotland. Most places will be clear then overnight. Some high cloud drifting in by the end of the night, turning things milder in the south, but rather fresh start to the day in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Light winds at first as well, but Storm Agnes is moving in quickly by this stage, bringing damaging winds to much of Ireland before spreading those very disruptive winds into Irish Sea coastal areas by the afternoon. So after the early sunshine, it turns increasingly windy through the morning, those winds then peaking in the afternoon and evening. The risk in northern and western parts of the UK of 50 to 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts and around exposed Irish Sea coasts of 75 mile-per-hour wind gusts. So dangerous coastal conditions, disruption to transport and some heavy rain as well could cause impacts for central and southern Scotland. Much of that clears through during Thursday, but it stays windy in the north with the further risk of coastal gales, bright skies further south and lighter winds. Some showers still going on Friday. A fine start to the weekend, though, with high pressure building for a time.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Yes, welcome back. Now, Suella Braverman's just done a massive speech on immigration. We're going to get some reaction very shortly from a member of the LGBT conservative community, because one of the things she said there, of course, was that being conservative-ish, Freudian slip, being gay is in no way a precursor to just being accepted as an asylum seeker. But before that, a fresh Tory split over HS2 seems to be heading down the track over Rishi Sunak's plans to axe the link between Birmingham and Manchester over escalating costs. The reports come amid claims that HS2 executives have acted like kids with the golden credit card. But Tory grandees, including Boris Johnson, George Osborne, Lord Heseltine, have warned that Rishi Sunak not to scrap the project. Here is what the Mayor of Greater Manchester had to say about the Prime Minister's plans when he spoke to GB News' political editor Christopher Hope earlier today.
For 15 years or more, many people in the Greater Manchester system have been working hard at the government's request to bring through these plans. We've devoted hours and hours and hours of time. All of our development plans are linked to it. If they pull the plug, they are ripping the heart out of the economic development plan for Greater Manchester and parts of the north. So all options would absolutely be on the table.
GB News' business and economics editor Liam Halligan is with us now with On the Money. Braverman's taken a lot of the heat off this, but this is a massive story in relation to HS2, and I believe you've been crunching the numbers in terms of the costs, haven't you?
I have. I've been looking at HS2 for years, ever since it was first proposed in 2010 by then Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling. Alistair Darling told me 3 years later I didn't think they'd be stupid enough actually to do it. So look, this is a vexed question. HS2 was meant to be from London to Birmingham, then Birmingham to Manchester and Birmingham to Leeds. The Leeds branch was scrapped last year. Now the Manchester branch could well be scrapped, just as the Tories start their party conference in Manchester, next to a disused railway. And by the way, as we go up to Manchester and come back, there's a rail strike. Let's have a look at some of the costs over the years. I've got a little graph. I know you like a graph, Patrick.
Love a graph.
You're a numbers man, really. Back in 2010, 30 billion. 33 billion a couple of years later, 56 billion by 2015, 80 billion by 2017, and then we're up at 107 billion. That's the latest estimate. That's an unofficial one from a guy called Michael Bing, who is a very well-respected consultant who's worked for both HS2 and Network Rail until he started giving them answers that they didn't like. So huge amounts of money. That's like 3 times the defence budget, Europe's most expensive railway. And now we've got a situation where the Birmingham to Manchester bit may not even happen, in which case we're spending upwards of 100 billion on a third railway line from London to Birmingham. You can already go from Euston to Birmingham, perfectly good service. You can go from Marylebone to Snow Hill, Birmingham, through the Chiltern line, another perfectly good service. Now we're going to have a third service, but of course still in the north of England, those small towns, those commuter towns, they can't get into Manchester, into Liverpool, into Sheffield, into Leeds, into York on those commuter lines. The commuter lines are slow, diesel-powered, infrequent trains, very, very crowded. Imagine if we'd spent the 20 or 30 billion we've so far spent on HS2 on proper improvements to railways in the north of England.
Yeah, and this is exactly the point I'm going to ask you now. Would it make greater economic sense for the north of England, for the Midlands, for the east of England, etc., to have better connectivity in amongst themselves as opposed to just having a direct, quicker route to London?
Patrick, I can't tell you, I'm not really particularly a train nerd. I'm just a journalist who's interested in this area. But people like me, proper railway insiders have been saying for years, if you want bang for your buck, and this is all taxpayers' money, the private sector isn't putting its money up for HS2 because it doesn't believe in the case. It doesn't believe there's a business case. This is all state money, which is why there's such a cost escalation, because it's no other people's money. Everyone's got their nose in the trough. All the engineering consultants, all the big landed, vested interests who've bought up land up and down the line. But almost everyone within the rail industry who isn't directly making their living from HS2 will tell you that the bang for the buck is if you link together our great northern cities into an alternative growth centre to London. It's an economy to rival London, those northern cities linked together. Better connections into and in between the smaller towns in the north, going into the bigger cities, because that's often where the work is. And yet I know, I've spent a lot of time up in the north of England making films, living up there for a while. The commuter services into the big cities are useless. Yeah. They're constantly delayed, constantly overcrowded. You often can't get on the train because they're diesel trains, Patrick. So you can't have, they can't pull many carriages. They're infrequent. They can't accelerate. You can't get that many of them on the line. So many of the trains in the north, about 70%, aren't electric, they're diesel. Spend the money on electrifying our rail system in the north. Spend the money on getting rid of the pinch points that really upend the network. Places like the Castlefield corridor going across central Manchester. Ridiculous that hasn't been widened. The whole network goes into one line in either direction. Impacts rail all the way across the north of England, northwest, up to Scotland. A few billion quid and you could solve it. And yet it's countless billions, apparently, on HS2.
Look, Liam, thank you very, very much. Really fascinating stuff, and a problem, of course, that's not going away anytime soon. Liam Halligan, there, our business and economics editor, with On the Money. Now, we've just about got time to squeeze something else in, which is, I think, an important reaction, actually, a necessary reaction, genuinely, to what Suella Braverman has said. She said that simply being gay is not enough of a reason for someone to be given asylum in the UK. I think she's pandering there to whether this is accurate or not, an increasing sense that maybe people are essentially pretending to be gay in order to be granted asylum in this country. GBNews presenter and LGBT Conservatives board member, Albi Amankona, joins me right now. Albi, how do the LGBT Conservatives react to what Suella Braverman has had to say?
Well, I think most Conservatives, if not all Conservatives, will have heard Suella Braverman speak today and actually agree with a large part of what she has said. Essentially, what she is calling for is reform of the UN Refugee Convention and reform of the ECHR. She's not calling to leave the ECHR like Theresa May did when she was Home Secretary. She's not calling to leave the UN Refugee Convention like Michael Howard's administration, when he was in opposition, was calling for. So what she is asking for is reform of the definition of a refugee. I think a lot of people can get behind that. And she's asking for a reform of the international system of refugees, because clearly when 780 million people could be considered refugees, we have to ask the question whether or not the system is fit for purpose.
Yeah, the headlines, as obviously you will be aware as well, before she'd even made this speech, because we had an advanced sight of some of it, the headlines across the BBC, across The Independent, across The Guardian and across several other outlets were overtly criticising her for potentially being anti-gay as a result of what she said about being gay not being an automatic right to claim asylum in a country. Was it anti-gay?
Well, the speech itself was not anti-gay. I think what she said in the speech is where there were genuine cases where people were facing persecution, then of course we should be offering them sanctuary. But where there is not a well-founded fear of discrimination, just a fear of discrimination. She didn't think that was a factor to allow someone to essentially shop around after they've already crossed the Mediterranean, gone to Italy, then gone to France, then claim asylum anywhere they pick in the entire world. You know, the LGBT people, if there are any indeed, who are crossing the Channel from France, are not leaving France for fear of persecution or indeed discrimination. They're leaving France because they want to come here because they think it's going to be a better country for them to live in.
Just one more quick one with you, Albie. Thank you for this. I think what she was really trying to do was say that with things like the illegal migration bill and with things like the Rwanda plan, Britain is getting it right, but we're being let down by the international community because they need to change their definitions and help us out a bit and protect your own borders. Do you think that's quite a useful tactic politically so that they can go, look, we are doing all we can, it's the world's problem, and we've told them to act?
I think it's only going to get her so far. Ultimately, if this government is not able to stop the boats or indeed fulfil the 5 pledges that they've made to the British people, all Labour have to do at the next election is signpost towards the 5 pledges and say that the Tory government has failed on all 3. There's only so much talking can do, and we really need to get to some action if the Tories are going to stand a chance at the next general election.
Albie, thank you very much. Always getting the cadence right. Albie Amankona, the LGBT Conservatives board member and GB News presenter. Interesting, really, I think, because look, there will be so much pushback to what Suella Braverman said. The usual types, they're already out in force. They were out in force before she made her speech, saying that she was anti-gay, saying that there was homophobia here, saying there was misogyny, saying that there was racism, all of that stuff. From what you've heard, and we'll play you clips of it again when I come back, do you think that there was any truth to what those allegations are at all? She's basically telling the international community to get their backsides in gear and stop the world being taken for a ride by something like the 780 million people who may be about to make their way to Europe and potentially Britain. But moving on, a Black Lives Matter activist has pleaded guilty to fraud after £30,000 went missing. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's News Channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's News Channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's News Channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. At 5, my reaction to Suella Braverman's major speech on refugees. I'll also get the views of a Labour MP. That should be fascinating. Bit of a ding-dong there. But a woman who was involved in the Black Lives Matter protest that led to Edward Colston's statue being thrown into Bristol Harbour has pleaded guilty to fraud after £30,000 mysteriously went missing. Zahra Salim admitted one count of fraud by abuse of position. She set up a GoFundMe page in 2020 before the Colston process. Now, any money left over was due to be given to a charity, but none of the money is alleged to have been handed over. Fascinating. Joining me now is GB News presenter Nana Akua. Nana, great to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much. I mean, what do you make of this?
Well, to be honest with you, Patrick, I'm not even slightly surprised at all of this. If you look at the sort of background of Black Lives Matter, because she was kind of working in their name, Patrisse Cullors, she was one of the founding members of Black Lives Matter in the States. And of course, there was huge question over what happened to a lot of the money that she acquired from Black Lives Matter. I think they made about 90 million in terms of dollars there, just literally capitalizing on white guilt, which is what they called it themselves. So it really is no surprise that this woman, Zahra Salim, I think that's how you say it, she's 23. Apparently it was about £30,000 that she had got on a GoFundMe page. It was meant for masks and things like that for people at the demonstration. What was left was meant to go to a charity called Your Mindset. And in the end, of course, that money didn't go to the charity. And it's quite sad because near the end, as you read through the article, it seems as though that charity was of young people, many of whom aren't here anymore. So it sounds like that was, and it was to take them to Africa. So, you know, this comes as no great surprise. And I hear it a lot. And these are people who are capitalizing on a form of white guilt, really, making a lot of people feel guilty and cadging on the back of something. Toppling that statue, of course, very posh names of people who toppled the statue. They didn't face any criminal charges, which I find astonishing. But it's in her interests, especially in a lot of black people's interests, some of them supporting Black Lives Matter, to keep this victimhood narrative going because there's money in it. There's money in being a victim. I mean, Harry and Meghan have showed you that if there's anything to be seen. But that's why a lot of them wouldn't like someone like me who calls it out and says, look, Black Lives Matter, the name itself is divisive, the movement is divisive, and in the end, guess what? Turns out that some of the organisers there are embroiled in what will appear to be fraud. It is no surprise at all, Patrick.
No, exactly. And what do you make of the way that she turned up to court? I think we've got a picture for people listening on radio. I'll talk you through it. It doesn't take me too long to talk you through it, basically. She's wearing a burqa, so there you go, with glasses on as well. I mean, what do you make of that? And a heavy raincoat. I mean, is there something of the coward about that, do you think?
Well, there is something. I mean, listen, she may say she's Muslim, which perhaps she is, and that's why she's wearing the burqa and the glasses. Fair enough, but she's hiding her face, which doesn't say much. We've got pictures of her anyway, so it's not going to do anything for her cause. But this is what discredits these kind of movements. They're supposedly Marxists. Marxists are supposed to be sharing out. Patrisse Cullors, turns out she bought about 5 different properties, gave money to her brother or whoever it was that was in the organisation. Others within the organisation actually criticise her for capitalising on the whole issue of racism. And to me, it's just yet another ridiculous phenomenon. Black Lives Matter. And, well, I couldn't stand it at the start. And I was right. It's just to me, it's just a fraudulent organisation. That's my view.
Yeah, and just tell me a little bit, Nana, you mentioned there about how you would not particularly, your views would not be viewed particularly favourably, potentially, amongst the, I'm generalising here, but wider black community, or BLM supporting black community, I suppose. Why is that?
Well, because I've called it out, haven't I? I've looked at it and said, look, there's very little that a black person can't do that a white person can do. In fact, I can't think of anything. And a lot of these movements are actually, to me, they're quite backward movements, because you're asking to go back to almost a form of apartheid where you're separating people based on the colour of their skin, and then you're privileging or not privileging. And I think it's divisive, because it's upsetting for a lot of white people who will see that and don't see it this way. And it's divisive for people who aren't of the race that you're saying the life matters. And for me, seeing that, I'll be honest, I face more racism from black people than I ever have from any white people. Right. And just simply for calling a lot of this out, I find it incredible that that would be the case. But that is the bottom line, in my experience, that some of the most racist people towards me have been people of colour, because they're not happy with me because I'm supposedly a traitor for daring to say that this particular behaviour is unacceptable. And I'm quite tired of seeing it, really. People need to stop calling things out in terms of colour, try to stop seeing colour in individuals and look at what they're doing, and using an organisation like Black Lives Matter to cover over when you're doing something bad and illegal, so fraudulent, is just quite typical, really, of this sort of thing, to be honest. Doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
No, look, Nano, great. Thank you very much. It's always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show as well, of course. There's Nano Queer there. It's GB News presenter, fan favourite, absolute fan favourite. Yep, loads to come, though, later on in this show, because loads of you will be getting in touch with your emails, and I promise you I will have a bit of time to go to them. But, yeah, look, just a quick flavour. Hillary's been on, Patrick. I'm 100% behind Suella and her brave speech. But I fear it may fall on deaf ears, and that's what I will be coming back with, OK? Suella Braverman has hit out with the international community, saying they're too afraid of being called racist and illiberal to do anything about the refugee crisis. What she's saying is that we need to change the definition of what it is to be a refugee, to make it more difficult for people who are economic migrants to come to places like Britain. 780 million is the number of people that she thinks could well be on their way. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers ease overnight with clear skies for many of us. A fine start to Wednesday, but then Storm Agnes turns up with the potential for disruptive wind and rain. Still some rain going across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England through the evening, but eventually the showers become confined to central and the far northwest of Scotland. Most places will be clear then overnight. Some high cloud drifting in by the end of the night, turning things milder in the south, but a rather fresh start to the day in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Light winds at first as well, but Storm Agnes is moving in quickly by this stage, bringing damaging winds to much of Ireland before spreading those very disruptive winds into Irish Sea coastal areas by the afternoon. So after the early sunshine, it turns increasingly windy through the morning, those winds then peaking in the afternoon and evening. The risk in northern and western parts of the UK of 50 to 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts, and around exposed Irish Sea coasts of 75 mile-per-hour wind gusts. So dangerous coastal conditions, disruption to transport, and some heavy rain as well could cause impacts for central and southern Scotland. Much of that clears through during Thursday, but it stays windy in the north with the further risk of coastal gales, bright skies further south and lighter winds. Some showers still going on Friday. A fine start to the weekend, though, with high pressure building for a time.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening, and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and this is going to be a massive hour. We react to Suella Braverman's barnstorming speech in Washington. She's talked really tough on illegal migrants and urged the world to put their money where their mouth is and start taking the problem as seriously as we are taking it right here in Britain. Some of the specifics, she said, let's change the definition of what it is to be a refugee. She says that too many people are just economic migrants, and wanting to live in a better place is not justification for asylum. She also said that too many people are living in safe countries for years and then are able to move to different countries and, well, frankly, claim asylum, and that needs to change. She also went on to highlight the numbers at play here as a rallying cry for the global community. She says that 780 million people under today's definition could be classed as a refugee. Where are they coming? Europe? Are they coming to Britain? Something, she says, needs to change. She also went on to say that simply being gay or a woman is not qualification or justification enough for warranting an asylum claim. She said, we live in a modern world with outdated laws. But it's not the only story in town. No, that's right, because, of course, we're also going to be talking about this. Andy Burnham, sue you, sir, he says to the government. If HS2 does not make it to Manchester, is this now the most expensive infrastructure failure of all time? Patrick Christys, GB News. Yeah, get those emails coming in thick and fast. We're also going to be talking about Ed Davey at the Lib Dem conference. Yeah, frankly, it was much less inspiring speech than Suella Braverman. And the Black Lives Matter fraudster as well. GB Views at gbnews.com. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Well, the top story today from the GB Newsroom is that the Home Secretary says migrants arriving in small boats has put an unsustainable pressure on the UK asylum system and on the British taxpayer. Delivering a speech in Washington today, Suella Braverman also argued that being discriminated against for being a woman or for being gay was not enough to qualify for asylum.
Where individuals are being persecuted, it is right that we offer sanctuary. But we will not be able to sustain an asylum system if, in effect, simply being gay or a woman or fearful of discrimination in your country of origin is sufficient to qualify for protection.
The Mayor of Greater Manchester says he could take legal action against the Tory government if the northern leg of HS2 is scrapped. Andy Burnham says Labour will build HS2 if it wins the election, because a failure to do so would have massive implications for the north. The Prime Minister is reported to be alarmed by the runaway cost of the high-speed rail link, believed to exceed £100 billion of taxpayers' money. The government's refused to rule out curtailing the project.
For 15 years or more, many people in the Greater Manchester system have been working hard at the government's request to bring through these plans. We've devoted hours and hours and hours of time. All of our development plans are linked to it. If they pull the plug, they are ripping the heart out of the economic development plan for Greater Manchester and parts of the north. So all options would absolutely be on the table.
Andy Burnham. Now, Sir Ed Davey says his party would make NHS and cancer treatments a top priority if his party gets into power. The Liberal Democrat leader told his party's conference in Bournemouth they will rescue the NHS with more GPs and carers and a greater investment in technology. He says he'll ensure cancer patients will start treatment within 2 months of an urgent referral and that they'd been let down under the current government.
I still think we could be doing so much better on cancer. Far too many people are still waiting far too long for a diagnosis or to start treatment after being diagnosed. And I'm afraid to say they've been let down and forgotten by this Conservative government.
Sir Ed Davey. Now, Scotland Yard will face difficult decisions over how to protect people in London because of a shortage of counter-terrorism police. Sir Mark Rowley says there's significantly less cover available after dozens of officers stood down from firearms duty. It was in response to one of their colleagues being charged with murder after the shooting of Chris Cabba in South London. Downing Street insists Londoners are safe, but the Met Commissioner admits his forces are stretched.
Over the weekend, it's had a very significant effect on our capability. We're now in a position where the numbers are strengthening. We can provide credible firearms cover for London, but I must be honest, it's still significantly less than normal, which will create some difficult choices.
A hospital trust failed to send out 24,000 letters from senior doctors to their patients and their GPs after they became lost in a new computer system. Newcastle Hospitals has apologised for any anxiety or inconvenience caused. As a result, the healthcare regulator has sought urgent assurances over patient safety. Most of the letters explained what should happen when patients are discharged from hospital. Some crucial tests and results may have been missed by patients, though. The Trust says the unsent letters accounted for less than 0.3% of all patient contacts. Water companies will have to return £114 million to customers after falling short of set standards. The regulator Ofwat saying most companies are failing to meet key targets on reducing pollution, leakage and supply interruptions, while customer satisfaction continues to fall. Thames Water must return the most, more than £101 million, followed by Southern Water, which must pay £43 million. Workers in the UK are taking more days sick than at any time in the last decade. New research from the Chartered Institute for Professional Development shows staff took an average of 7.8 sick days in the past year, up from 5.8 before the pandemic. It's blaming stress, COVID and the cost of living crisis. The biggest cause for long-term absences is poor mental health. Vehicle scams have soared by 74%, costing victims almost £1,000 on average each time. Potential buyers are being duped by fake posts on social media or online marketplaces advertising vehicles that sometimes don't exist. They'll often be encouraged to pay a deposit or even the full amount up front, despite not seeing the car in person. People aged between 25 and 34 are the most likely to be stung. The findings were based on analysis of scams reported by Lloyds Banking Group customers during January and June in 2023. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, Suella has only gone and done it. She's cut through the BS about illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees, etc. She has come out and said the truth. But you can bet your bottom dollar that the global elites won't like hearing the truth because it doesn't suit their open border globalist agenda. What our Home Secretary has said is not only accurate, but it shows that she's willing to stand up for British interests on the world stage. The UN Refugee Convention is far too generous and it is not fit for the modern age. She is calling for it to be changed. There are around, she says, 780 million people who could be classed as refugees. And if they decide to rock up in another country, then that country would probably have to take them. Britain has passed laws to protect its own borders, its own culture, its way of life, its taxpayers' money, the whole shebang. But we are essentially rendered as impotent as a 90-year-old man after a bottle of scotch because this international treaty is, for want of a better phrase, too soft. We have to change the definition of a refugee. We have to make it impossible for people to choose their preferred destination, like a hyperactive kid in a travel agent. And we have to act now. That's what she's calling for. The problem is not British law, really. The problem is not what this government wants to do. The problem is the international conventions and rules, and they have to change. It was less than a week after Rishi Sunak stuck his head above the parapet on net zero and railed against climate alarmism that Emmanuel Macron basically did the same thing in France. Leaders in other countries are too afraid to make the first move on things themselves. But if somebody else is brave enough to do it, then maybe they will fall in line. That is a point that Suella Braverman has made when it comes to things like the Rwanda scheme, that other countries are actually saying that they wish that they could do something similar. But they don't publicly come out and say that. Suella Braverman has been brave by name and brave by nature today. She will have to weather a storm, a big one, from the usual type, saying that she's inhumane and cruel. She's trying to make life more difficult for refugees, that she's homophobic or a misogynist, for saying that simply being gay or being a woman doesn't qualify you for automatic asylum. That actually just wanting a better life is not enough to be a refugee or an asylum seeker, even if you can understand why people would want one. But those people who criticise her are wrong, and the Home Secretary is right. Those people are disingenuous and dishonest. They are the kind of people who think the taxpayer should pay for everything. They have no plan to deal with the consequences of their own ideology, like 780 million people moving to Western nations in the coming decades, who don't care for British or European culture, or who are often the people piping up against Suella, making a lot of money out of the migrant crisis. Wishy-washy words like #BeKind are of no practical use when dealing with real-world situations, and those words are often spouted by people who either live in a protected bubble of financial security or who simply do not understand what life is like for ordinary Brits. What Suella Braverman has done today in that speech in Washington is to be honest and to reflect the views of the majority of people. Watch now as the liberal media clatters into her. Watch now as the woke backlash fires up. If you go on various news sites or on Twitter, you will be forgiven for thinking that the entire British population thinks that Suella Braverman is an evil monster. Well, she isn't. I think she's shown real courage to say what she said today. And if you think what she said is right, then I think personally it's time to make your voice heard. Well, that's what I think. I want to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.com. Look, she's called them out. She's called people out and said you're too afraid of being called racist or illiberal to actually do anything about what is now very much an international problem. She is undeniably politically trying to say that what Britain is doing is trying to control its own borders, and we're being banned from doing that by an outdated international legal system, essentially. And she made the case that there are 4 different reasons why we actually need to control borders. It's civic, it's security, it's democratic, and it's practical. But Suella Braverman urged even Western states to act on migration now, warning them that the crisis will only get worse in coming years.
Illegal migration is not merely an event-driven or cyclical problem. It's a permanent and structural challenge for the developed nations in general and the West in particular. Unless we act, it will only worsen in the years to come. War, political instability and climate change will of course exacerbate migration flows. According to the UN, at the end of 2022, there were over 108 million forcibly displaced people globally, with 29 million considered to be refugees by the UNHCR. But we must be honest. The fundamental drivers of this epoch-defining challenge are economics and demography. In January, the World Economic Forum said that migration will become one of the top 5 global risks in the next decade, ahead of national resource crisis, geo-economic confrontation and environmental disasters. It's a fallacy that as countries get richer, emigration from them declines. As the American economist Michael Clemens has found, emigration from a country tends to rise until it reaches a level of income of about $10,000 per person before declining. World Bank data show that more than 3 billion people live in countries where the average income is below this threshold. The potential for migration to increase yet further is truly colossal.
Right, so that's Suella Braverman there talking in Washington. I want to get the views of the Labour Party. So I'm joined now by Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, Khalid Mahmood. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So Suella Braverman has said that patriotism is a good thing, the nation-state is a great thing, and that population growth can't be too quick because it means that there's no integration. A misguided dogma of multiculturalism is toxic. Is she right?
Absolutely, absolutely not. She has just made a huge amount of bluster with no competence involved in it at all. She hasn't been able to resolve the issue of the people on the boats coming through. She spent over £200 million on the Rwanda refugees project, £18 million on the BB Stockholm, billions of pounds in hotels, people, and she's not processing those people so we can see who to take out of the country and who to keep in the country. Talking like this doesn't do anything. She talks about culture. This government has stopped the ESOL funding for people coming in who can integrate and learn English. So they're not able to do that because the funding for those English classes has stopped. She doesn't want to get people involved in employment and to do things. She will not provide safe routes that she's talking about. Will she tell us? Will she tell us when she says that we all have a responsibility to take proper refugees, which I agree with, what's going to be her statistics? What's going to be her numbers? How many people is she going to agree with? So this is all bluster as she normally does, but absolutely delivers nothing. They've not, with all the laws they've put in, I'm sorry, with all the laws they've put in, they've not stopped them so far.
Would you be against an updated version of the UN Refugees Convention, which says, which basically makes it tougher for anyone to claim to be a refugee? Would you be up for that, do you think, then?
No, I think we've got to look, if there's an issue to look at, the United Nations should look at it, but I don't think you're going to get very far with that because the United Nations never moved to do anything positively. What we've got to do is look at is the problems that we've caused across the world, ranging from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to Libya and everywhere else in the world.
Is it honestly, Khalid,
despot countries? No, we've got to deal with them. We've got to deal with them honestly. And what we've got to do is not cut our aid.
OK, right. Look, honestly, on the day that Suella Braverman has just stood up in Washington and said that, you know, it's an international problem, that borders are something that's worth protecting, that countries are something that's worth protecting, that schools are going to have to find 213,000 new places by 2026, that immigration is responsible for 45% of new housing, 1 in 5 births in this country now are to foreign-born mothers. You look at Paris, half of crimes apparently are committed by illegal migrants over there. Half of Americans say that their southern border is being invaded. And are you genuinely saying to me that the Labour Party thinks that we just need to suck it up and atone for our actions in places like Afghanistan and just roll over and accept
absolutely not. Absolutely not. Sir Keir Starmer has been across to France, has struck some deals, and he's going to work through that. He's going to put proper resources in to deal with this. Our own border force patrolling it, along with the special units, immigration units, to look at this. We're going to put proper resources to deal with it.
What are the deals Keir Starmer's struck? What are the deals? Sorry, what are the deals that Keir Starmer struck?
He's just spoken to President Cameron about looking at how we'll deal with this, and he's got some good response from him. And what he's going to do when he comes into power, he will put those into place. He's somebody who understands the law. He's somebody who understands how to deal with these issues structurally, and he's not somebody who just blusters and makes, in some instances,
I've got to drill down on that, Khaled, I'm afraid.
Comments.
I'm sorry. I've got to drill down on that because, look, whether or not people like it, and fair enough, I get that you don't like it, but what Suella Braverman was saying was that due to civic, security, practical and democratic issues, we have to get a control of migration. Illegal migration. What she's urging the world to do is to change the definition from the refugees, basically, to make it less likely and less easy for anybody to become a refugee. She makes a pretty strong case for that. She says that if the world did that, then we would be able to enforce things like the illegal migration bill and the Rwanda plan. With respect, Khaled, what I think you've said to me is that Keir Starmer has struck a secret deal with Emmanuel Macron. Is that right?
Well, what he's doing is he's negotiated a deal with him. He's talking to him, and once he gets into power, he will have further discussions. Well, one of the key things is looking at joining border forces, both with the French and our border force, to be able to control those people. The National Crime Agency having more powers to deal with these boats coming through and investigating people across into France and into Europe and dealing with those people who are trafficking these people. So those people are going to be stopped. This government hasn't succeeded in doing that, and that's what Sir Keir Starmer is saying. Deal with the people at the cause and sort it out.
Do you think if somebody has fled a country or left a country and has lived safely in a safe country for years, that they should still be able to claim asylum in Britain?
No, I think what the issue with that is simply if they're living in a safe place, they shouldn't be able to come across and do that.
So you agree?
What you've got to strike a deal with Europe, what you're going to, not what she's saying, what you're going to strike a deal with is, first of all, she's going to come up with the figures of what she thinks is acceptable. And the big issue that you're missing here is the amount of 8 billion or 7 billion pounds that we're paying for hotels daily. If she processes those people, those that are not entitled to stay here would go and would leave. So we would continue to pay huge amounts of money. She's unsuccessful in dealing with it.
I think, maybe genuinely politely, I think maybe you're missing the point, because what she's saying is that at the moment, under the current definition of what it is to be a refugee, we just have to accept most of those people, even if they are economic migrants. That's what she's looking to change. So we could process them all day long, right? But we'd end up with most of them staying, even though maybe they don't deserve to.
But we're not processing them, that's the problem. The reason why there's a huge cost at the moment is because we're not. So let's get on and do the proper work,
but that would mean that
and then see what we've got to deal with and resolve those issues.
But unless they change the definition of what it is to be a refugee, OK, then that would mean that most people are able to stay, which is possibly why we're not processing so many of them at the minute, because we know that. In order to do that through the United Nations, it'll take you something in the region of 3 to 5 years. So you're telling me Suella's happy to pay for those people's hotel costs here for the next 3 to 5 years without sorting out what their status should be, and those people who are not entitled to stay should then be allowed to go back to where they've come from. That's what the Labour Party is saying, not keeping these people at huge
huge cost to our constituents, to all the people across the country, and that is what will make a difference. Processing these people and getting them, those that are not entitled to be here, then sending them back. But do the proper thing, do the right people, for the British people, and provide security and safety and cultural issues for them by not hatred, but doing the right thing, which is what we should do. Be firm and be strong on refugees and do it properly, which is what Keir Starmer wants to do.
So Labour's plan to deal with potentially 780 million people being eligible for refugee status in the Western world and in Britain would be to process them quicker.
No, you're totally misleading the question here. What the Labour Party has said it will do, first of all, 80 million people are not going to come to the UK, nor should they be able to come to the UK. We have to look at those serious issues that people actually manage to arrive here. First of all, what we've said all along is provide safe corridors for these people to travel, so we can vet these people at the point of it before they even get into the United Kingdom, and to see who deserves to be here, who doesn't. So when there are legal immigrants, then we can deal with that. But what she's doing is clumping everything together, not providing safe routes for people to come through, and that is what she's got to do to deal with this. And she hasn't done any of the substance, she hasn't done any of the work, and now she's going off making huge grand speeches just because the party conference is coming. That's what all this is about.
It's fascinating stuff, Khaled. Thank you very much. I could talk to you about this all day. I really do appreciate you coming on. Honestly, genuinely, I do. No, it's great. It's great to hear the Labour side of this. Khaled Mahmood there, who joins me now, the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. We do now have a contrast between parties, and this is only going to increase as the election gears up. But we'll have to wait to find out what Rishi Sunak will do next with HS2, because the government's been threatened with legal action if it scraps the northern leg. Yes, I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. We are Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You are watching and listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. In a few minutes, I will bring you the highlights from Suella Braverman's big speech on migrants. And I think we might have just heard from a Labour MP that Keir Starmer struck a secret deal with Emmanuel Macron. Did you hear that? I certainly did. Hopefully we'll have a bit more details to bring to you. But the future of HS2 is hanging in the balance, with a growing divide from the Tory party over whether the northern leg of the rail link should be axed. But speaking exclusively to GB News, Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, has actually threatened legal action against the government if it fails to complete the project in the northwest of England. He spoke to GB News' political editor Christopher Hope earlier, where he said, I'll sue you, sir.
For 15 years or more, many people in the Greater Manchester system have been working hard at the government's request to bring through these plans. We've devoted hours and hours and hours of time. All of our development plans are linked to it. If they pull the plug, they are ripping the heart out of the economic development plan for Greater Manchester and parts of the north. So all options would absolutely be on the table.
Nothing's off the table, right? Yeah. I'm very pleased. They're hot-footing it off the train. It's Christopher Hope. You've been practically jet-setting.
Yes, yes, on the train. Yes, not on HS2, on the Avanti West Coast. No, it was fine. But let's leave.
You'll never be on HS2.
Let's leave that thought there. Well, I will when I retired. I'll go off on my day trip to Liverpool.
Yes. Okay. So what have you gleaned from your trip to Manchester?
He's angry.
Right.
Andy Burnham. They are frustrated and angry, and correctly so, that this northern leg of HS2, this fast line from Birmingham to Manchester, may not go ahead, and that's the concern.
Yeah, OK, all right. And he is threatening serious legal action, then, is he? I mean, he's saying that, they've geared up all of their infrastructure, they've geared up everything, and it's a problem.
Well, my question to him was, will you go legal? And he said, all options will be on the table. They'll be hearing from us. And what Greater Manchester are doing in these big cities now outside of this, the UK, or outside London, is that they are getting geared up for they're getting more confident of where they want to be and backing what they see as their interests against the Whitehall.
How big an issue is this going to be for the Conservative Party? Because there is, the cost, I was going to say there's a cost-benefit analysis, but good grief, that train has left the platform a long time ago.
100 billion and counting.
Well, just two. But, is it going to be a massive political loss? I'm not really sure. In Manchester, it's going to be a huge loss for the Tories. They're not very popular in the city there anyway.
Well, there are bits of the route they're going to do that connect the Northern Powerhouse Rail. So the whole Manchester-Liverpool route, there are bits of HS2 that really matter, and without it going ahead, that can't work. So it really matters up there, I think. And it's more symbolic, I think, for the North.
Yeah, well, it is symbolic. I suppose it's an obvious sign, isn't it, that you did want to connect the North. But I think a lot of Northerners, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I think a lot of Northerners would have been happier with the North and the East and the Midlands being better connected within itself.
Yeah, and that's the argument, I think. They're looking at rephasing it with the autumn statement coming up. But the Tories have lost the plot over the past few days. They've got the big conference coming up there in Manchester. I'll be back on there's a train strike on Saturday, so in a minibus getting to Manchester.
Hang on a minute, there's a GB News minibus?
There's going to be a minibus.
I've not been made aware of a minibus.
Well, you're hitchhiking, aren't you?
I am hitchhiking.
But we will be there and readying you in for your show whenever it happens. but we'll be on the way there. No, but the point is, this lost my plot completely. The timing is appalling. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has said, "Why are we doing this?" Well, we are the concerns, not why we're doing this, but there's a concern about the cost of it. What can we do about it? And so Grant's chapter said the same thing. And even on Monday, the PM, Rishi Sunak, wouldn't commit to it going north of Birmingham. That's the concern.
Yeah, no, indeed, and it remains to be seen. Andy Burnham, as you've rightly said there, clearly fizzing, clearly very angry, and I think understandably so, genuinely. And, you know, potentially we will have a legal battle going on between Manchester and Downing Street, which should be good.
Yeah.
Well, so there we go.
Good for him to fight for the North, I think.
Well, to fight for the North, the king in the North, as he, well, he probably calls himself. But anyway, there we go. Thank you very much, Christopher, there, political editor, who's hot-footed it back from Manchester and will not be led astray by me as well. I'm deeply disappointed. One day I will get you. But, OK, loads more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. In a few moments' time, we will hear from the Shadow Minister who's criticised Suella Braverman's big speech on migration. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Well, the top story this hour is that the Home Secretary says migrants arriving in small boats has put an unsustainable pressure on the UK's asylum system and the British taxpayer. Delivering a speech in Washington, Suella Braverman argued being discriminated against for being gay or a woman was not enough to qualify for asylum.
Where individuals are being persecuted, it is right that we offer sanctuary. But we will not be able to sustain an asylum system if, in effect, simply being gay or a woman or fearful of discrimination in your country of origin is sufficient to qualify for protection.
And as you've been hearing, the Mayor of Greater Manchester says he could take legal action against the government if the northern section of HS2 is scrapped. Andy Burnham says Labour will build it if it wins the election, because a failure to do so would have massive implications for the north. And Sir Ed Davey says his party would make NHS and cancer treatments a top priority if his party was in power. He says he'd ensure cancer patients would start treatment within 2 months of an urgent referral and that they'd been let down under the current government. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And looking at the markets for you today, the pound buying you $1.2170 and €1.1509 euros. The price of gold is £1,563 and 12 pence for an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed the day today at 7,625 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers ease overnight with clear skies for many of us. A fine start to Wednesday, but then Storm Agnes turns up with the potential for disruptive wind and rain. Still some rain going across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England through the evening, but eventually the showers become confined to central and the far northwest of Scotland. Most places will be clear then overnight. Some high cloud drifting in by the end of the night, turning things milder in the south, but rather fresh start to the day in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Light winds at first as well, but Storm Agnes is moving in quickly by this stage, bringing damaging winds to much of Ireland before spreading those very disruptive winds into Irish Sea coastal areas by the afternoon. So after the early sunshine, it turns increasingly windy through the morning, those winds then peaking in the afternoon and evening. The risk in northern and western parts of the UK of 50 to 60 mile/hour wind gusts and around exposed Irish Sea coasts of 75 mile/hour wind gusts. So dangerous coastal conditions, disruption to transport and some heavy rain as well could cause impacts for central and southern Scotland. Much of that clears through during Thursday, but it stays windy in the north with the further risk of coastal gales, bright skies further south and lighter winds. Some showers still going on Friday. A fine start to the weekend, though, with high pressure building for a time.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, it's a big day for Suella Braverman. It's a big day for Britain on the world stage, genuinely, and potentially, although I suspect it won't be, but it arguably should be, a big day for the world doing something and coming together to help fight illegal migration, the refugee crisis, the asylum seeker crisis that's taking place. But it is, of course, that big Suella Braverman speech on migration that we brought to you live here on GB News, and the reaction to it has been fascinating. She urged Western states to act now. She's warning that the crisis will only get worse. The reason why she's saying it is that economic prosperity in third world countries and in other nations is by no means a precursor to them staying in their own country. She said that that would take a long time, and in the meantime, millions and tens of millions of people will have made a decision to permanently move to the Western world. She went on to say a lot of things. I'm just going to start by playing you this clip.
Illegal migration is not merely an event-driven or cyclical problem. It's a permanent and structural challenge for the developed nations in general and the West in particular. Unless we act, it will only worsen in the years to come. War, political instability and climate change will of course exacerbate migration flows. According to the UN, at the end of 2022, there were over 108 million forcibly displaced people globally, with 29 million considered to be refugees by the UNHCR. But we must be honest. The fundamental drivers of this epoch-defining challenge are economics and demography. In January, the World Economic Forum said that migration will become one of the top 5 global risks in the next decade, ahead of national resource crisis, geo-economic confrontation and environmental disasters. It's a fallacy that as countries get richer, emigration from them declines. As the American economist Michael Clemens has found, emigration from a country tends to rise until it reaches a level of income of about $10,000 per person before declining. World Bank data show that more than 3 billion people live in countries where the average income is below this threshold. The potential for migration to increase yet further is truly colossal. The raw numbers show how demand for migration, legal or otherwise, is likely to surge in the coming years. So too does personal testimony. A 2021 Gallup poll found that 16% of adults worldwide, around 900 million people, would like permanently to leave their own country. And those numbers are not evenly distributed around the world. 37% of people living in sub-Saharan Africa, some 481 million people, and 27% of those living in the Middle East and North Africa, around 156 million, say they'd like to migrate. The ease with which some of them might reach Europe poses a unique and deepening challenge. The fact is that our countries are exceptionally attractive. 4% of those polled by Gallup, approximately 40 million people, named Britain as their preferred destination. 18%, approximately 162 million people, named the USA. These numbers are respectively more than half of our current total populations. Now, those in favour of a more liberal approach when it comes to legal migration tend to say at this point, so what? Isn't it a good thing that people the world over want to come to the West and contribute? And why can't we absorb and welcome them? And wouldn't the problem of illegal migration be significantly reduced if we made it easier for people to come to our countries legally? Well, there are 4 core arguments in opposition to uncontrolled and illegal migration: the civic argument, the practical argument, the security argument, and the democratic argument. Firstly, the civic argument against uncontrolled and illegal migration. I believe that the nation-state is one of humanity's great civilizing forces. It creates a shared identity and a shared purpose, and that does not need to have a racial component. Typically, it binds people of different racial backgrounds together. Far from being an ugly emotion, patriotism stirs people to heroism, and to kindness. It is the belief that we have specific obligations to others precisely because they are our fellow countrymen. And in order for nationality to be sustainable, economically, culturally, and in terms of public support, it needs to encompass everyone. That, in turn, means that the country cannot grow exponentially and still maintain the harmony needed for everyone to feel that we are all in this together. And let's remember something that is all too often forgotten. Integration inevitably takes time. If immigration is uncontrolled, it makes it harder for society to adapt and accommodate new cultures and customs, and for communities to meld together.
Look, that speech went on for about half an hour. Here's a key point for me. This is arguably the best point she made. She said that almost no illegal migrants end up paying in tax what they've taken from the state. So almost no illegal migrants end up being a net financial benefit to this country. I think that is important to get out there. She said that seeking asylum and seeking better prospects are not the same thing. And then she said she was going to broach a taboo, and that taboo was this: if you're fleeing persecution somewhere, that does not mean that you should be able to seek asylum anywhere. And she highlighted another crucial point, which is that we currently have people at the moment claiming asylum in Britain who have left whatever country it was that they are originally from for whatever reason. Often that was not actually that they were fleeing persecution, it is just that they wanted a better life. They've then lived perfectly happily and perfectly safely in another safe country, and then at some point travelled to Britain to claim asylum here. Clearly, that is not sustainable. And what Suella Braverman was trying to do there was say to the world, we need to act now and change the definition of things. We have an outdated refugee convention that is not fit for purpose in the modern world, and if we don't act now, then things will be changed irreversibly and for the worse. But Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper claims that the Home Secretary has failed on this issue and that Suella Braverman is simply looking for someone else to blame.
We want to see proper international cooperation, both on tackling illegal migration and also on supporting refugees who fled persecution and conflict. But at the moment, the Tories are totally failing to get any grip on the asylum chaos, on the criminal gangs that are running along our border, on the hotel use that is now costing the taxpayer £8 million a day. And instead of setting out any practical plans, all the Home Secretary is doing is ramping up the rhetoric and looking around for someone else to blame. We should have a proper grip rather than the rhetoric and gimmicks that we always get from this Home Secretary. I think the Home Secretary has so badly lost any grip on the Tories' asylum chaos, which has been getting worse in the 13 years that they have been in power, that instead she is just lashing out, looking for other people to blame, to target people who are lesbian and gay, who face persecution in places like Uganda, where they have been threatened with the death penalty, is just looking for scapegoats and targets rather than recognising her responsibility to get a grip of the asylum system, to tackle the chaos that we face, and to go after the criminal gangs that are operating along our border.
She's clearly been told to use the word grip a lot there, hasn't she? Can I just say, I don't know if anyone picked that up, with respect, is that not quite disingenuous to say that what Suella Braverman was saying there was that she wanted to persecute gay and lesbian people from countries like Uganda where they face the death penalty? I think that actually is the opposite of what Suella Braverman was saying, wasn't it? She was saying that there are genuine cases of people who are gay, who face real-world persecution, but there are also places where maybe it's just a bit uncomfortable to be a gay person, and that in itself maybe doesn't qualify you for asylum. I thought that actually was quite an interesting interjection, that from Yvette Cooper, and not necessarily the rigorous accuracy and honesty that she so strives for and calls for from everybody else. But here's a change of tone for you. How much would you pay for a cheese and pickle sandwich? Yes. Would you believe one well-known chain is charging more than £7? £7 for a cheese and pickle sandwich. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. I'm just going to finish the show a little bit with some emails, OK? Because I've had thousands of emails so far this show, primarily about what Suella Braverman was saying over there in America. Jim's been on. Jim says, Patrick, Suella Braverman would have my vote for Prime Minister. I get this. I mean, we are a slightly fickle bunch here sometimes, aren't we? You know, people say the one thing that we want to hear and then all of a sudden we'd vote for them. But, look, what she was obviously trying to do was say that Britain, with the illegal migration bill and with the Rwanda policy, is trying to do everything it can to control its borders, but due to international refugee definitions, we are unable to do that, and therefore the world needs to change. She was also saying that multiculturalism, essentially, has failed and that it is a toxic concept. She was quoting people like Angela Merkel. She was quoting people like Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron himself has come out and tweeted that actually we cannot accept the world's misery. I wonder if we are witnessing now a sea change. And for all of this talk about Britain being world leading, look, OK, there's only so much we can do with that. But is it not time, as our Home Secretary has done, for somebody from Britain to stick their head above the parapet and actually say what a lot of people are too afraid to come out and say? Whether or not there will be any real difference, fair enough. And I do, by the way, for what it's worth, subscribe to the view that there is at least an element of this that is trying to pass the blame. However, I do think that that blame does need passing, so, you know, there is that. Anyway, Michelle Dewberry joins me now for a little tease about what's coming up on your show.
Hello. Well, of course, the main story in town is Suella Braverman's speech. My panel completely disagree. I've got Kelvin McKenzie on. He just told me it's one of the best political speeches that he's heard. Safe to say, Joe Phillips pretty much entirely disagrees with that. Fascinated as well to get lots of my viewers' responses on that. They've already started emailing in their thoughts. She's been called like a pound shop Enoch Powell. So I want to explore that. How
you see, this
fair is that?
Look, this is the thing, and I called this before she even made her speech. When we got snippets of what we were expecting her to say hours ago, the BBC, The Independent, The Guardian and a couple of other outlets immediately pounced on the things she was saying about just being gay or being a woman does not necessarily mean that you have a right to asylum. They immediately went down the anti-gay route, OK? And so what we're seeing now is name-calling, like, oh, you're a pound shop Enoch Powell, oh, you're a racist, oh,
but
you're
that's
this,
just how this society is. People have lost the ability to respectfully disagree, so what they try to do is name-call in order to try and shame you into silence, because who wants to be called awful names? Like, no one enjoys that. So ultimately what they think is if I call them enough names, if I try and smear them and humiliate them enough, then maybe, just maybe, that person may just quietly bang their head and go, yeah, OK, I don't want to be called those things, so leave it alone then, which is not really appropriate, because we need robust, strong debate in this country. We need more of that, not less. And yeah, like I said, fireworks, I think, coming up with Kelvin and Joe. And of course, there's a lot to be said on this migrant stuff, but I also want to try and touch on a couple of other points as well. Prisons, do you think we need to be prioritising refurbing them?
I'd build more.
Yeah, apparently they don't meet the top standards, some of them. So is that really the priority for our spending at this moment in time? And I want to explore mental health a little bit as well.
OK.
Whether or not companies need to start paying you to have some mental health leave or not.
Interesting.
Again, my panel very strongly disagree with each other on that.
Well, Kelvin McKenzie has caused a few mental health crises in his time, hasn't he?
He's listening to you. He's
yeah, I know he
you.
is. Yeah, he's my former boss, Kelvin McKenzie. I know him well. He's a friend as well. Although he probably won't appreciate me saying that. But yeah, no, I know firsthand the devastating impact that Kelvin McKenzie can have on the psychological.
Oh, really? Well, I might try and raise that with him in a few minutes and see how he pleads to that.
Absolutely. Look, Michelle, thank you very much. It's going to be a great show. Make sure you stay tuned for all of that. Michelle Dewberry for the next hour on GB News. But here's a quick question for you. How much would you pay for a cheese and pickle sandwich? Let's be honest, it's a bit of bread, a couple of slices of cheese and some pickle. It shouldn't set you back that much. But Pret a Manger are charging an incredible £7.15 for what it calls posh cheddar and pickle baguette. That's what it costs to eat at its High Street Kensington branch in West London. The ingredients, in full, are a bit of cheddar, some pickle, some roasted tomatoes, a freshly sliced red onion, and a touch of free-range mayo and mustard cress. Let's see, shall we, if this is any good. OK, so... Right, there we go. Well, it's all right, but to be honest with you, I'd rather have a Greggs. Cheese, all right.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers ease overnight with clear skies for many of us. A fine start to Wednesday, but then Storm Agnes turns up with the potential for disruptive wind and rain. Still some rain going across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England through the evening, but eventually the showers become confined to central and the far northwest of Scotland. Most places will be clear then overnight. Some high cloud drifting in by the end of the night, turning things milder in the south, but rather fresh start to the